Hello there, and welcome back to Roz Night Squeeze the Quo. I am having some technical difficulties. There we go. Let's see if it'll play. Yeah, it kind of does. Kind of, sort of. There we go. As you can see, I'm getting a little fancy. Once again, welcome to Roz Night Squeeze the Quo. Thank you very much to my 13 subscribers. And we're going to play in the picture-in-picture True Detective Season 1, Episode 1 and 5, while I go through the FBI audit of their protocol that they did back in 2005 at a symposium, which I love that word. I love saying it. So whenever it's on the documents that we're going through on the paper, the protocol, I'm going to say it. I'm going to highlight it. We're going to go through that, and we're going to have videos along with it. I kind of did little clips of the former FBI agents who are speaking on this case in the last month of November, 27th, 28th, and 29th mostly. It took me a little while to get here because in the beginning of November, our homegirl Mary Ellen O'Toole, she spoke the language I understood, as well as with Anne and as well as with Gary on the mass murdering. It may not be a sexual assault, but it could be, does not mean it wasn't sexually motivated. So with these former FBI agents that are talking, which by the way, a couple of them on here have their own podcasts, they were using a language that I wasn't familiar with, or their terminology I wasn't familiar with. So in order to be objective, and by the way, objective commentary, educational purposes, explicit language will be used. And I will be voicing my opinion. With their terminology they were using, I could not fit it in with what we've been following through because that's not being objective. So I had to look a little bit further, and I found basically the protocol that the FBI and other disciplines came together and wrote this out for law enforcement to use, as well as other in the FBI, to make it a collaborative approach. So we're going to go through that. It's going to be a long one. It's going to be long. There are many sections to it. So I'll go ahead on YouTube that they can go ahead and cut it up and section it out. But I'm just going to do a one straight shot. Take your time. Get a snack. Get a drink. I'll be having wine while I do this. And we're going to go through it, watch some videos, and I want you to pay attention when they talk about this Jack the Ripper and how this was considered the first type of behavioral analysis and profiling, and the way it's laid out and the way it's spoke about. There's some eerie similarities with this Idaho 4 case, especially. They look at 5 victims, but they particularly look at 4 victims within this case of Jack the Ripper. And I went ahead and put notes of the videos I've used. I had to update and I lost everything. So what I'm going to do instead is, once I found everything again in my history, I made a playlist, and it's private, but I'll go ahead and make that public so that you can see if you want to watch any of those videos on your own time, because I'm just going to go through them not quickly as possible, just the highlights. And the person that I got the Jack the Ripper from, he's a very Jack the Ripper and other enthusiast. He's been doing tours through London for the past 40 some years, and he has his own channel about that, and he's got like 40,000 subscribers. So we're going to go through that. I look forward to you listening to this. Thank you for coming, and let's squeeze the quo. The picture just passed, but that picture that I had of Dylan and Bethany, I'm looking more at the one with Dylan. And in the background is a male with like a doll that's always struck me as peculiar. And I don't know if it's a doll or a person. I don't know if it's a mirror that is reflecting from her camera when she's taking a picture, her selfie, or if it's an opening into like a bathroom or something. So I see toilet paper and I see lotion, but it's like a person holding up like a little person. It's very odd. It's very peculiar. I don't know what that is about. I don't know if anyone else has noticed that, but if you have, please let me know. And I will go ahead and, I don't know if I can really put a picture on there, but let me see if it comes up anytime soon. And there's Jack the Ripper, clad in black with a knife. Our buddy Brett Payne. Everyone's certain people. Here we go. Right there. What is this? See what I'm saying? Let's get to it. We're going to start from the very beginning. So here we go. Serial murder. Multi-disciplinary perspectives for investigators. And we're looking at this because, yes, it's 4 is considered mass, but the way the FBI was there in boots in the ground, and the way the terminology that the former FBI agents were using, it sounded more of a serial murder. And you'll hear Jonathan Gillum say he has not done this before, but he certainly has done this before, but not up to this many before. So we're looking at if it's a possibility that it's a serial murder case of one person's committing all of them at once, or one or more persons committing 2 or more at once of 2 different separate times. So I don't know if this is their way of trying to mislead, but we'll go through it. Okay. And even though Mary Ellen, excuse me, is right here, is in the earlier November, I brought her in again because she is on here. So we have to give her props because she definitely knew what she was talking about. So here's the table of contents. As I said, it is very involved. You have the introduction, definition, causality, psychopathy, motivations, investigative issues, forensic issues, prosecution of serial murder cases, media issues, and serial murder investigations, issues regarding talking heads in the media, and then the epilogue, and then the symposium agenda. So, as I said, using True Detective, Season 1, Season 2, I believe that closely relates more to the news on the Allen Murdaugh trial, not Murdaugh, the Delphi murders. There's a lot of similarities with this case in True Detective. Season 1 is based off of an actual murder that happened in Louisiana. I'm sure it's loosely based, or it sounded like they used a lot of the information that was in documents to create this Season 1, so that's why I have that playing. So here we go. Message from the director, Mueller. And just the highlights. But for years, law enforcement investigators, academics, mental health experts, and the media have studied serial murder, from Jack the Ripper in the late 1800s to the sniper killings in 2002, and from the Zodiac killer in California to the BTK killer in Kansas. These diverse groups have long attempted to understand the complex issues related to serial murder investigations. Until the Serial Murder Symposium, however, there had been few attempts to reach a consensus on some of these issues. This monograph presents the findings and collective wisdom of a multidisciplinary group of experts who brought their individual experience and insights to the same table. Our hope is that it will give you new ideas and new resources as you continue your important work. The FBI is committed to contributing to the understanding of these horrific acts. The FBI's National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime stands ready to assist our state, local, and international partners. We believe the best way to combat any threat, be it terrorism, gang violence, or serial murder, is to combine our knowledge and resources with those of our partners and to work as a team. I am grateful for the partnerships that helped spur this symposium and for the partnerships that were formed as a result. Working as a team. So I got a little video here on what is the FBI.
Briefcase.
Focus on the FBI.
I, Thomas A. Halliday, do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I take this obligation freely, without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I am about to enter. So help me God.
And so it starts with the simplest and yet the most meaningful of ceremonies, the story of Tom Halliday, Special Agent, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Briefcase, revolver, and coveted badge. These are symbols of a new trust, a new responsibility. And Tom Halliday must learn to carry them with the respect and honor that is an FBI tradition. A bus ride is the beginning, a trip south from Washington to the U.S. Marine Corps base at Quantico, Virginia. This college-like building is the FBI Academy, the place where Tom and his classmates will both live and learn during most of the 13 weeks of training that lie ahead. It will be for Tom like going back to school, sharing a room with 3 other agents in training. Keeping personal possessions, no matter how valuable, in lockers that need never be locked, and finding out day by day the meaning of teamwork and its importance in the FBI. This is a time of sacrifice for Tom.
And there you go. I like that. Keep your possessions in a locker that never needs to be locked. In a community where we never had to lock our doors. The acknowledgments for the symposium. The members of Serial Murder Symposium working groups for their assistance in planning the symposium. The names of these individuals are listed in Appendix B. The symposium attendees for their generous sharing of time and expertise in the area of serial murder. The names of these individuals are listed in Appendix C. You get the point. With the symposium. Forward. And the topic of serial murder occupies a unique niche within the criminal justice community, where there has been significant independent work conducted by a variety of experts to identify and analyze the many issues related to serial murder. There have been a few efforts to reach a consensus between law enforcement and other experts regarding these matters. I find that very enlightening, to say the least. Why is it that there have been few efforts to reach a consensus between law enforcement and other experts? Why is there such that divide there? Is it because of law enforcement feel intimidated? I mean, it's understandable. Most of them don't start off with a college degree. They can work into it. It's preferred that they do. They're encouraged to. They do an academy like the FBI. I don't think it's 13 weeks. I'm sure it varies between jurisdiction and state. But if you have the ability to have some foresight and be able to understand that you succeed when you have smart people around you, and if you're smart enough to realize that, it makes you look more it looks like you have the grounding to be able to take direction, to work, to collaborate, and people don't look down on other people who realize that's considered a strong leader. And you hear people with leadership, they say, strong leaders are those who have smart people working around them, even people who are more smart than them. That's a sign of a good leader. So I find that sounds like it's still going on today with the relationship between MPD and FBI, as well with the current investigation that was just brought up with the Delphi murders, how there was a disconnect of some sorts between those two working together. So the Federal Bureau of Investigation hosted a multi-disciplinary symposium in San Antonio, Texas on August 29th, 2005 through September 2nd, 2005. And a quick note, we're going to look into later, and there is a particular case in Austin, that, not San Antonio, but Austin, Texas, where it was 28 years ago. You may remember this, some of you. There was a person who came in and shot 4 females who were working in a yogurt shop, and there was a conflict between the investigators at the state and local level with FBI, because FBI would not hand over their forensic information to them, for they said it was due to privacy issues. So I find that very reflective right now. So we'll look at that towards the end where it gets brought up. A total of 135 subject matter experts attended the 5-day event. Law enforcement officials who have successfully investigated and apprehended serial killers, mental health, just mental health, academic, and other experts who have studied serial killers and shared their expertise through education and publication. Officers of the court who have judged, prosecuted, and defended serial killers, and members of the media who inform and educate the public when serial killers strike. There were attendees from 10 different countries on 5 continents, and they had various topics that they looked into: typologies, pathology, causality, myths, forensics, the role of media, prosecution issues, organization. They kind of did a deep dive and looked at it as a whole of where they could better implement and have a protocol set in place so that you have some organization, you have a processes to go through so that you don't make these little hiccups, or that if you get overwhelmed, you look at the protocol. It's overwhelming now. What do we do? Oh, let's look at the protocol. This is what we got to do. Let's break it down. A, B, C, and D. And then slowly chip away at it so you get organized. And they talk about that as well, which is very telling with this current case right now. The goal in publishing this monograph is to outline the consensus views from a variety of disciplines on the causality, motivations, and characteristics of serial murders, which will enable the criminal justice community to generate more effective responses in the identification, investigation, and adjudication of these cases. Sounds excellent. The National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime. The National Center of the Analysis of Violent Crime, the NCAVC, is a component of the FBI's Critical Incident Response Group located at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia. The primary mission of the NCAVC is to provide behavioral-based operational support to federal, state, local, and international law enforcement agencies involved in the investigation of unusual or repetitive violent crimes. So they have VICAP here as well, behavioral forensics, investigative perspectives, and this is to provide law enforcement agencies with better understanding of the motivation and behaviors of offenders. The Serial Symposium. So we're going to look at analysis, profiling, and this is more about documentation.
Come across, or they have one of these
where crime investigators could upload information to see if their cases might be part of a serial pattern. Such a place exists in the form of an FBI database of more than 85,000 homicides, sexual assaults, and missing and unidentified persons. The Bureau wants more investigators to know about it to help them potentially make connections between cases. To promote awareness about the database and to grow the repository, the Bureau's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, or VICAP, conducts training sessions with law enforcement agencies across the country.
VICAP is unique in the sense that we are looking for those different cases that tend to lend themselves to a serial nature.
These could include cases where offenders leave behind unique signatures. Was the victim posed, for example? Were items taken from the scene?
When they come across or they have one of these types of cases, they place it in VICAP. It opens up the opportunity for them to use our resources, the VICAP crime analysts, so that we can do the analytical work for them, provide the agency with investigative leads so they can hopefully bring their case to resolution.
At a recent training in Scottsdale, Arizona, about 30 homicide investigators, crime analysts, and police administrators logged into the VICAP system, the secure, web-based.
Sounds like a good idea. I like it. We'll do all the little details. We'll do all that little work. Put that information in there so you can look it up. Give yourself a head start. Give yourself some puzzle pieces to look into to see if there's a pattern, and that way you can go from there. And here is
and why did the crime take place? At the core of criminal profiling is the belief that you can tell something about the offender, their characteristics if you like, by a careful and considered examination of the offence. So after a crime has been committed, use all the information that you can gather about the crime, for example, details about the crime, what occurred, where it occurred, and information either from or about the victim. And you use this to draw up a profile of the characteristics of the person who most likely committed the crime. This may include information on demographic features, so their age, their gender, their ethnicity. And, depending on your approach, this profile might include information on the perpetrator's likely motivation. Why are they engaging in this behaviour? And why did the crime take place when and where it did? Offender profiling is typically used in serious crimes like murder and in serial crimes, and also when it's difficult to identify the offender using standard methods. So when described like this, criminal profiling sounds very straightforward. But although pretty much everyone agrees on the basic principle, there's actually a lot of debate about how to do it in practice, and different approaches have emerged. So if we think about how a profile of an offender is created, we can see that there are a few different approaches. These include the FBI's criminal investigative analysis and the investigative psychology approach, which is most commonly associated with David Cantor. There is also diagnostic evaluation and the recently developed crime action profiling. Now within these approaches, you also have specialities, if you like, that focus on one element.
All right, so there you go. A methodology, and it sounds easy, but just like anything, when you try to take something that you learn from a book or on paper and then to apply it in real time, it's harder than it sounds. You know, it's a muscle like anything else. It's something that you have to do and learn and be open and look at it and take risks. And just from my experience as a professional working in a medical field where you're in a high pressure situation, when shit hits the fan, it's surprising how much actually is like a muscle memory. But then there's also times where you really, you freeze for a second, and then you really have to ground yourself and remember your basics from what you learn. But that takes practice. So it's not like it's impossible to do. It's very plausible. So it's just something that you have to be open and willing to do. And you also have to have the right environment as well. If you're in an environment that is not big on wellness and growing and learning and applying and doing the right thing, then it's going to be difficult to be in that environment to actually apply that method, those skill sets.
This booklet provided The United
This kinda goes
States
back
in
the day how it
1930.
used to be, and now they're trying to get out of that.
The year Babyface Nelson robbed his first bank, and Bonnie met Clyde. We got our news on the corner. Our mail came in envelopes. And our crime statistics from a new publication, Uniform Crime Reports for the United States and its Possessions. This booklet provided information on 7 offense classifications. But even though multiple crimes may have been committed, only 1 offense per incident was reported. It was originally produced by the International Association of Chiefs of Police, but was shortly handed over to the FBI's Uniform Crime Reporting Program, or UCR. For nearly 60 years, the summary reporting system of UCR remained virtually unchanged. However, the volume, diversity, and complexity of crime steadily increased. In 1989, the National Incident-Based Reporting System, or NIBRS, was implemented. NIBRS collects data about victims, offenders, property, and arrests. NIBRS provides for 52 offense classifications with up to 10 offenses per incident. This provides a more comprehensive view of crime in the United States with greater flexibility in the compiling of data. NIBRS isn't just about names and numbers. It gives us a picture of the circumstances and who the victims are. Victims of domestic violence, identity theft, animal cruelty, and reports on cybercrime. Although the
All right, I wanted to go up to that point with the animal cruelty. Since we've learned about this case in Moscow, the amount of animal cruelty that's been going on there, since if you saw the video I did with focusing on Ethan and Xana and the Sigma Chi, and the 911 call, the mysterious one, and how 3 weeks prior, that poor dog, that I think was Australian Shepherd, was skinned, and that video that I did where it was back in 2000, I want to say 17, where there was animal blood on the Pi Phi sorority house, and it sounds like that area has a long history of animal cruelty. So it makes me think, is that in these systems there, could that be why FBI was alerted just for that? Because sometimes we like to think of the most craziest rationale of why this happened, but really it's something very basic, and it's animal cruelty. Not that it's basic, but it's something that's more known, that's more tangible, that has a history of. And hearing that makes me believe that there is a culture where that's allowed to happen, that they thought that was funny, that it's a joke. That's not funny. That's not a joke. That's cruel. That's a sure sign that there is something that's going to escalate. Animal cruelty is one, and setting fires is another. Like, those are distinct characteristics of someone who is very unstable and is dangerous. So moving on, the Serial Murder Symposium was conceived, planned, and coordinated by the staff of the Behavioral Analysis Unit 2, BAU2. The resources for BAU2 are focused on serial, mass, and other murders, sexual assault, kidnapping, and other criminal acts targeting adult victims. BAU2 staff members have developed significant expertise on the subject of serial murder and regularly provide operational assistance, conduct research, and provide training on issues related to serial murder.
So geographical profiling, for
Platform
example,
prompts users
is often
to
used in a
FBI
attempt to
listening
locate.
So here's the introduction. I did drive-through a couple times, so it's different every time. So here we go, the introduction. The 19th century Europe, Dr. Richard von Krafft-Ebing conducted some of the first documented research on violent sexual offenders and the crimes that they committed, best known for his 1886 textbook Psychopathia Sexualis. Dr. Krafft-Ebing described numerous case studies of sexual homicide, serial murder, and other areas of sexual proclivity. I do have a video. Once I get out of here, we can see it, but it's all in German, and it's a German doctor, and he looks at how an aspect of why these murders escalate or happen to those who do them is there's a homosexual aspect to it. They're not able to, due to back in the days, and even still today, but it's definitely a high risk to be out that way or to express yourself that way. And when I learned in my sex offenders book that I showed in my other video with Terry on how J. Edgar Hoover with the stranger danger, she goes through the history of that as well. There was a lot of evidence that showed back in the day in the culture with the Roman Empire and the Ottoman Empire that type of sexuality was very open. It was very not an issue. It pretty much changed once the Roman Catholics kind of put in the kibosh of we're not doing this anymore, and then you had the Puritans put a stamp on it as well. So that she kind of goes through that history of that, and that's what Dr. Krafft-Ebing does as well. So now looking at the serial murders is a relatively rare event, estimated to comprise less than 1% of all murders committed in any given year. However, there is a macabre interest in the topic that far exceeds its scope and has generated countless articles, books, and movies. This broad-based public fascination began in the late 1800s after a series of unsolved prostitute murders occurred in the Whitechapel area of London. These murders were committed by an unknown individual who named himself Jack the Ripper and sent letters to the police claiming to be the killer. These murders and the nom de guerre, Jack the Ripper, have become synonymous with serial murder. This case spawned many legends concerning serial murder and the killers who commit it. In the 1970s and the 1980s, serial murder cases such as the Green River Killer, Ted Bundy, and BTK sparked a renewed public interest in serial murder, which blossomed in the 1990s after the release of films such as Silence of the Lambs. Okay. So here you go. And this
One problem that was confronting them was whether or not the killer had demonstrated any anatomical or surgical knowledge in his crimes. Of criminal profiling. It began, I beg to report that I have read the notes of the 4 Whitechapel murders, viz. 1. Box Row, 2. Hanbury Street, 3. Berners Street, 4. Mitre Square. I have also made a post-mortem examination of the mutilated remains of a woman found yesterday in a small room in Dorset Street. 1. All 5 murders were no doubt committed by the same hand. In the first 4, the throats appear to have been cut from left to right. In the last case, owing to the extensive mutilation, it is impossible to say in what direction the fatal cut was made, but arterial blood was found on the wall in splashes close to where the woman's head must have been lying. 2. All circumstances surrounding the murders lead me to form the opinion that the women must have been lying down when murdered, and in every case the throat was first cut. 3. In the 4 murders, of which I have seen the notes only, I cannot form a very definite opinion as to the time that had elapsed between the murder and the discovering of the body. In one case, that of Berners Street, the discovery appears to have been made immediately after the deed. In Bucks Row, Hanbury Street and Mitre Square, 3 or 4 hours only could have elapsed. In the Dorset Street case, the body was lying on the bed at the time of my visit, 2 o'clock, quite naked and mutilated. Rigor mortis had set in, but increased during the progress of the examination. From this, it is difficult to say with any degree of certainty the exact time that had elapsed since the death, as the period varies from 6 to 12 hours before rigidity sets in. The body was comparatively cold at 2 o'clock, and the remains of a recently taken meal were found in the stomach and scattered about over the intestines. It is therefore pretty certain that the woman must have been dead about 12 hours, and the partly digested food would indicate that death took place about 3 or 4 hours after the food was taken, so 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning would be the probable time of the murder. 4. In all the cases, there appears to be no evidence of struggling, and the attacks were probably so sudden and made in such a position that the women could neither resist nor cry out. In the Dorset Street case, the corner of the sheet to the right of the woman's head was much cut and saturated with blood, indicating that the face may have been covered with the sheet at the time of the attack. 5. In the 4 first cases, the murderer must have attacked from the right side of the victim. In the Dorset Street case, he must have attacked from in front or from the left, and there would be no room for him between the wall and the part of the bed on which the woman was lying. Again, the blood had flowed down on the right side of the woman and spurted on the wall. 6. The murderer would not necessarily be splashed or deluged with blood, but his hands and arms must have been covered, and parts of his clothing must certainly have been smeared with blood. 7. The mutilations in each case, excepting the Berners Street one, were all of the same character and showed clearly that in all the murders the object was mutilation. 8. In each case, the mutilation was inflicted by a person who had no scientific or anatomical knowledge. In my opinion, he does not even possess the technical knowledge of a butcher or horse slaughterer or any person accustomed to cut up dead animals. 9. The instrument must have been a strong knife, at least 6 inches long, very sharp, pointed at the top, and about 1 inch in width. It may have been a clasp knife, a butcher's knife, or a surgeon's knife. I think it was no doubt a straight knife. 10. The murderer must have been a man of physical strength and of great coolness and daring. There is no evidence that he had an accomplice. He must, in my opinion, be a man subject to periodical attacks of homicidal and erotic mania. The character of the mutilations indicate that the man may be in a condition, sexually, that may be called satyriasis. It is, of course, possible that the homicidal impulse may have developed from a revengeful or brooding condition of the mind, or that religious mania may have been the original disease, but I do not think either hypothesis is likely. The murderer, in external appearance, is quite likely to be a quiet, inoffensive-looking man, probably middle-aged, and neatly and respectably dressed. I think he must have been in the habit of wearing a cloak or overcoat, or he could hardly have escaped notice in the streets if the blood on his hands or clothes were visible. 11. Assuming the murderer to be such a person as I have just described, he would probably be solitary and eccentric in his habits. Also, he is most likely to be a man without regular occupation, but with some small income or pension. He is possibly living among respectable persons who have some knowledge of his character and habits, and who may have grounds for suspicion that he is not quite right in his mind at times. Such persons would probably be unwilling to communicate suspicions to the police for fear of trouble or notoriety, whereas if there were a prospect of reward, it might overcome their scruples. I am, dear sir, yours faithfully, Thomas Bond. Bond's profile of the killer is, by its very nature, of limited use in the continuing hunt.
All right. I kind of just jumped right in and did it because I'm just fascinated at how closely that profile resembles to today at Moscow, Idaho, with the way the victims, poor Kaylee, Maddie, Zaina, and Ethan, they were saying that they were most than likely asleep and really didn't feel anything, and it was gouges, and how the single person who did it is probably peculiar, and he's probably around people who have some type of intelligence. And just those similarities, just when I saw this, just blew my mind. Am I reaching? Is it a stretch? Let me know in the comments, because I just find that just so eerily the same. On the bed, at the corner of the wall. And it's just, is it like really the formula of what they use almost? And this is speculation, of course, but I mean, this is Jack the Ripper. It's been going on, it's been talked about for so long, and they don't know who did it, but they have this information. So it's as if they've used this formula, so to speak, to bring out a narrative to a point of, well, he had a knife and it was gouges and they were sleeping, and there was blood all everywhere. Like he said, he must have cut him arterially, and it's on the wall naturally. And you hear former FBI people say that, and how there must have been a lot of blood, and it's in the amount of time, 12 hours later, before they knew that the victim was found. And it's fascinating. Totally fascinating. Is it a reach? Is it a stretch? Who knows? Who knows nowadays? The way that these cases are presented to us, we just don't know, and it's awful that this is happening to these females and male. It's like, when's it going to stop? It's probably never going to stop, but it's going to help if people do their jobs. And you'll see as we go.
For Jack the Ripper.
Alrighty, here we go. Let's keep it moving. So law enforcement professionals are subject to the same misinformation from a different source, the use of anecdotal information. Professionals involved in serial murder cases, such as investigators, prosecutors, and pathologists, may have limited exposure to serial murder. Their experience may be based upon a single murder case or a single murder series, and the factors in that case are extrapolated to other serial murders. As a result, certain stereotypes and misconceptions take root regarding the nature of serial murder and the characteristics of serial killers. A growing trend that compounds the fallacies surrounding serial murder is the talking heads phenomenon. Given credibility by the media, the self-proclaimed authorities profess to have expertise in serial murder. I got a little problem with that, because they love to use expertise in the court as well. And maybe we'll go back into it, maybe go in the future with this, but there was evidence, and it was, I want to say, a 2020 or a Dateline back in the day, where a judge would have a course that you could take online. So, and you pay like $300, and then you take these courses, and you pass them, and then that way you can go into court as an expert to give your testimony. With no education, no on-the-field experience or field representation. You just take a $300 course, and then you can start going to courts and doing cases. So it's got to stop somewhere. Someone's got to take a stand. A growing trend that compounds the fallacies. We did that. Unfortunately, inappropriate comments may perpetuate misperceptions concerning serial murder and impair law enforcement's investigative efforts. It was decided by the majority of the attendees to issue a formal statement of position regarding the media's use of these types of individuals. So it makes me think that now it's just former FBI agents that are just doing this case that we hear from. They almost kind of taken the forefront on that. And I have watched Ann Burgess and Gary Bucato. They weren't on regular media that I know of. They're on YouTube, and they're pretty well versed. So I find that telling. So here they talk about the myths of serial killers, and one of them is, are serial killers, are they all dysfunctional loners? And many serial killers hide in plain sight within their communities. Serial murderers often have families and homes, or are gainfully employed and appear to be normal members of the community. Because many serial murderers can blend in so effortlessly, they are oftentimes overlooked by law enforcement and the public. And then they give it two examples here. One's in Spokane, Washington, and Seattle, Washington. And here we're going to hear these three FBI, or two of them, excuse me. On the myths.
It's good to have you. Thank you for doing this, sir.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Surprising that they have kids back on campus when they're talking about a targeting crime?
Not surprising. I think that the police are doing everything they can to identify the suspect. The campus has to go on. Life has to go on. So I think the police are covering this case as best as they can with the help of the state police and the FBI.
By percentage, it is much more likely that this was committed by somebody, especially being the means here, stabbing, by someone who knew these people than by a stranger. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think based on the open source information, it appears that the suspect, the killer, is likely someone who knew the victim or victims, knew the layout of the house, knew how to get entry into the house. There was no indication of forced entry, no indication of rape or an economic incentive, a motive of robbery. He had to be somewhat confident that he could overcome any obstacle in his way. He had an...
Okay, I'm having a hard time pausing this and pausing it. So there we go. Hiding in plain sight. They must have known the killer. The perpetrator was known by the victims. He knew the area well, and he knew the house well.
And people might have identified somebody before, again, within, I would say, at least a 3-hour travel distance to Moscow. It is that they were going to be seen. So I think it's one male, young enough to have been in that neighborhood. I think the potential is that they entered from the second floor because the first floor was never disturbed. And there's also a wooded area behind that house. But here's an important thing that I think people should realize. This is probably not the first time that this person did this. As I explained before, this is an adrenaline-filled incident. When somebody goes in and they...
Goodness gracious. So there you go. Well known in the community. So well known in the community that he can just go in there and do what he did and then walk out without being noticed. Wearing a dark cloak, and just can go in and come out.
To the killings of those 4 University of Idaho students, police now sifting through hundreds of tips, thousands of pieces of evidence. Arcana Whitworth, details as they continue to trickle out, some of the new details we're hearing. What stands out to you?
So you have 4 people killed on 2 different floors of a house, which would certainly suggest, TJ, that somebody at least knew the basic layout of the house. Think about how long it would take to go from victim to victim, so somebody had patience. The police have described a combat-type knife. So the person apparently went there to really do what they ended up doing. So once you've eliminated, and I assume this has happened, sort of the immediate circle, college students that are around these kids, people that may have threatened one of them, stalked them, whatever. I'm not hearing anything that supports a killer in that group. So what do you have to do if there's not an immediate connection? You have to go to sort of...
So he says at first it's someone within the group that knows the area, but he is starting to, this one was done in November 29th, I want to say. And he has started kind of putting a wedge in that it was someone that they knew of to someone that was an acquaintance or someone who is even further out in that circle that somehow is known by them kind of, sort of, but knows the house. So like a landlord or someone who owns the house or a maintenance worker or a plumber, who knows. But so he's kind of putting that out there that it's not someone close anymore. It's kind of someone outside of their inner circle.
Kill, especially with a knife.
A wider circle.
All right, so serial killers are all white males. That's a myth. Contrary to popular belief, serial killers span all racial groups. There are white, African American, Hispanic, and Asian serial killers. The racial diversification of serial killers generally mirrors that of the overall U.S. population, which is very true, but it's the majority that are white male. And I'm just saying that because when this case first broke out and Brian Koberger got arrested, they were saying that right from the jump. Oh, you know, he does fit the profile of a serial killer. The majority of them are white. And that kind of alerted me when I heard this, because at the time, which was odd, I was working in the state of Pennsylvania, and not in the Scranton area, but more west. And when they said that, I'm thinking to myself, oh, so now they're going to use the statistics? Now they're going to go with that angle? Which totally threw me off. And serial killers are only motivated by sex, which is not true. All serial murders are not sexually based. There are many other motivations for serial murders, including anger, thrill, financial gain, and attention seeking. So the three of them pretty much say that he goes more towards the it's thrilling, it's adrenaline, it's an adrenaline rush, and the amount of adrenaline he needed to have in order to do all four of them, it was a thrill for him. He says this as well. Let's see if I can find it.
And people might have identified somebody before, again, within, I would say, at least a 3-hour travel distance to Moscow, Idaho, that this person probably lives.
Jonathan, a lot of the people who have spoken out about this case in terms of law enforcement are making statements that are leading people to believe that they do know more than what they're releasing.
Work their way through this than to succumb to peer pressure and tell people they just can't get one little thing that looks out with, I think it's IR, and then it has a monitor that goes off. People use them on their driveways all the time. You could put that at your front door. Zoe was wanting to make it an exclusive or all-inclusive incident. When somebody goes in and they kill, especially with a knife, there's a tremendous amount of adrenaline that goes into this. And to do that 4 times in one event shows that this person has most likely not done this before. So people need to realize this individual is probably odd. He's probably shown some type of behavior that people think is strange or menacing when they're close to them. And I would advise people
details,
if they
as
know
they
someone
continue
like
to
this,
trickle out some of the new details we're hearing, what stands out to you?
So you have 4 people killed on 2 different floors of a house, which would certainly suggest, TJ, that somebody at least knew the basic layout of the house. Think about how long it would take to go from a killer in that group. So what do you have to do if there's not an immediate connection? You have to. So once you've eliminated, and I assume this has happened, sort of the immediate circle, would certainly suggest, TJ, that somebody at least knew the basic layout of the house. Think about how long it would take to go from victim to victim. This was a big party house. And so that makes it more difficult. Less connections makes it more difficult many times to solve a crime. And you're also going to have to look at the police have already talked about this, of similar type crimes.
I'm falling apart here. You get the picture. I've listened to these guys so many times, it's making me batty. So let's move on.
It's good to have.
So here, he says right here that he realizes, or it looks like he wasn't doing it for financial gain. Because I guess, from what we know, from what he's able to see and hear, what the police have given the public, that there was no robbery of any sorts. Nothing was stolen, and they just came in there and killed and left in a very short period of time. Let's see here. Most serial killers have very defined geographic areas of operation. They conduct their killings within comfort zones that are often defined by an anchor point, place of residence, employment, or residence of a relative. Serial murderers will at times spiral their activities outside of their comfort zone when their confidence has grown through experience or to avoid detection. Very few serial murderers travel interstate to kill, which I wanted to read that because with Brian Koberger, they made it sound he went onto he came off a highway. He was coming off of highways to get there, 95 and then State Road 70, I want to believe, that's in Pullman, Washington. So they specifically put out those highways, saying he had to go down 95 and then he came there. So I don't know if that's just coincidence, but I found it a little comical that was the route, was taking the highways. And then serial killers cannot stop killing. It has been widely believed that once serial killers start killing, they cannot stop. There are, however, some serial killers who stop murdering altogether before being caught. In these instances, there are events of circumstances in offenders' lives that inhibit them from pursuing more victims. These can include increased participation in family activities, sexual substitution, and other diversions.
All right, let's go to the forensic side of this now. This is a hard one. FBI profiler, host of Inside the Criminal Mind, podcaster Andrew Bringle. It's good to have you. Thank you for doing this, sir.
Okay.
Let's bring in.
And then the last one is all serial killers are evil geniuses, which is a myth. Most, however, are not adjudicated as insane under the law. They do have some personality disorders, including psychopathy, antisocial personality, and others. The media has created a number of fictional serial killers as geniuses who outsmart law enforcement at every turn. Well, if they're not organized and not working as a team, I could see that happening. Serial killers want to get caught. While most serial killers plan their offenses more thoroughly than other criminals, the learning curve is still very steep. They must select, target, approach, control, and dispose of their victims. The logistics involved in committing a murder and disposing of the body can become very complex, especially when there are multiple sites involved, which is not in this situation. It was in the home and then out. As serial killers continue to offend without being captured, they can become empowered, feeling they will never be identified as the series continues. The killers may begin to take shortcuts when committing their crimes. This often causes the killers to take more chances, leading to identification by law enforcement. It is not that killers want to get caught, they feel they can't get caught, which I can understand that if these killers don't get caught and justice has not prevailed, what is going to not have them not do it again? Especially if it is in their inner circle and they're young in their 20s. That is very concerning. And here is what the one was saying, a 3-hour distance from the home, because he's kind of saying it's not the inner circle. He believes, that was Jonathan Gillum, that they have to be at least like a 3-hour driving distance from the murder site. And I had the little Gilligan's Island here with the 3-hour tour, because that's just, that's such a random, I don't know where he got that from, because as we're going to go through this, there is no talk about that, and that they just said it's very unlikely that it's someone going on an interstate driving to do these murders. So I don't know where that came from. So the definition of serial murder. So the definition is, while these definitions do share several common themes, they differ on specific requirements such as the number of murders involved, the types of motivation, and the temporal aspects of the murders. Previous definitions of serial murders specified a certain number of murders, varying from 2 to 10 victims. This quantitative requirement distinguished a serial murder from other categories of murders, single, double, or triple. Most of the definitions also required a period of time between the murders. This break in time was necessary to distinguish between a mass murder and a serial murder. Serial murder required a temporal separation between the different murders, which was described as separate occasions, cooling off period, and emotional cooling off period. Generally, mass murder was described as a number of murders, 4 or more, occurring during the same incident, with no distinctive time period between the murders, which is what Gary Picotto was talking about. These events typically involve a single location where the killer murdered a number of victims in an ongoing incident, which is what happened at Moscow, which is 4 were murdered, so that's considered a mass murder. The term serial killing means a series of 3 or more killings. So, just being speculative now with the Delphi, which was 2 females, and now we have Moscow with 3 females. So, it's just, I definitely believe that they know more than we know, obviously, but we'll just keep going forward. Let's see. Although the federal law provides a definition of serial murder, it is limited in its application. The purpose of this definition was to set forth criteria establishing when the FBI could assist local law enforcement agencies with their investigation of serial murder cases. The symposium attendees reviewed the previous definitions and extensively discussed the pros and cons of the numerous variations. The consensus of the symposium attendees was to create a simple but broad definition designed for use primarily by law enforcement, so we can't get too specific for them, which I don't understand why, because isn't part of being an officer is to stop the bad guys? And this is a very bad guy. These are horrible guys. I don't know if you can are you allowed to pick and choose what are bad guys and what are not? One discussion topic focused on the determination of the number of murders that constitute a serial murder. Academians and researchers were interested in establishing a specific number of murders to allow clear inclusion criteria for their research on serial murders. Killers. However, since the definition was to be utilized by law enforcement, a lower number of victims would allow law enforcement more flexibility in committing resources to a potential serial murder investigation. So maybe this is why they're looking at it as a serial murder, so that they can help law enforcement and get the resources that they need, because we heard very well right from the get-go how they had all the resources they need. They had all the help they can get. They have the ISP, and they have labs, and they have the FBI. They have the resources needed. So here we are. They got the resources to a potential serial murder investigation. So let's do it right. Motivation was another central element discussed in various definitions. However, attendees felt motivation did not belong in a general definition, as it would make the definition overly complex. Well, this is a complex situation, these serial killers, so the validity of spree murders was a separate category, was discussed at great length. The general definition of spree murder is 2 or more murders committed by an offender or offenders without a cooling off period. All right, so then different discussion groups at the symposium agreed on a number of similar factors to be included in a definition. These included 1 or more offenders, 2 or more murdered victims. Incidents should be occurring in separate events at different times. The time period between murders separates serial murder from mass murder. In combining the various ideas put forth at the symposium, the following definition was crafted. Serial murder: the unlawful killing of 2 or more victims by the same offender or offenders in separate events. Here we go. Here we go. Causality and the serial murderer. Following the arrest of a serial killer, the question is always asked, how did this person become a serial murderer? The answer lies in the development of the individual from birth to adulthood. Specifically, the behavior a person displays is influenced by life experiences as well as certain biological factors. Serial murderers, like all human beings, are the product of their heredity, their upbringing, and the choices they make throughout development. Causality, as it relates to the development of serial murderers, was discussed at length by the symposium attendees. Causality can be defined as a complex process based on biological, social, and environmental factors. In addition to these factors, individuals have the ability to choose to engage in certain behaviors. The collective outcomes of all these influences separates individual behavior from generic human behavior. Since it is not possible to identify all of these factors that influence normal human behavior, it similarly is not possible to identify all the factors that influence an individual to become a serial murderer. Really? See, I have to disagree with that. Yes, humans are complex, but they all have the same basic motivations, like your ADLs: food, shelter, water, social. That you have the basics. You got to start at a building block. You have the basics. We're all humans in that we all are here. We have basic needs, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I mean, it's definitely plausible in my opinion. Human beings are in a constant state of development from the moment of conception until death. Behavior is affected by stimulation received and processed by the central nervous system. Neurobiologists believe that our nervous systems are environmentally sensitive, therefore allowing individual nervous systems to be shaped throughout a lifetime. The development of social coping mechanisms begin early in life and continues to progress as children learn to interact, negotiate, and compromise with their peers. In some individuals, the failure to develop adequate coping mechanisms result in violent behavior. You think? I feel so terrible for these four. It looks as though that their families are amazing. Like Ethan's mom said, they just saw him in Parents Week, and they were so proud that they raised 3 beautiful human beings, and they were proud of themselves, as they should be. But it looks like other parents were not as well versed in raising their children, and I hate to be harsh and maybe disrespectful on that, but this is where I come from. Everyone's got a smartphone in their hand. You basically have a computer in your hand with the resources that are needed for you to get help or to look out and to reach out. There's so many forums. There's so many things you can look, even on YouTube. They have so much information that you can learn. If you have a question, you want to learn how to do something, you can go on YouTube, and there are people that will teach you and talk to you and give you an aspect or a professional point of view. So this, I don't know, or I can't. It's very hard for me to believe personally that if you're in college at that point and you can get your child to college, that means you must have some adeptness to getting the need for your families, or that other people see around you. It blows my mind. Neglect and abuse in childhood have been shown to contribute to an increased risk of future violence. Substance abuse can and does lead to increased aggression and violence, which, yes, substance abuse is definitely it definitely inflames a situation, especially if you don't have these other tools that are in your back pocket so you can help cope with certain emotions that come to you. And yes, it's hard being 20. Yes, it's hard being, you're in school. It's not easy. I get it. It's difficult. But that's why you have these fraternities and sororities and all these groups to help you get through it. And the University of Idaho has Title IX money, grant money, to give resources to students that need assistance with depression, abuse, violence, counseling. All those resources are there. Now, at the moment, our kids, 20-year-olds, are they able to identify this? Possibly not. Maybe their peers aren't. They're not in a great group, but they are around professionals. And as a professional, if you see someone that's hurting, or those professors, they have their ear to the ground. You have people that know what's going on. They know what's going on, especially when it's a small town. Everyone knows everything. Everyone knows everyone's business. So there had to be rumbles going on that were being ignored for many reasons. And the symposium attendees agree that there is no single identifiable cause or factor that leads to the development of a serial killer. Rather, there are multiple factors that contribute to their development. The most significant factor is the serial killer's personal decisions in choosing to pursue their crimes. It is a personal choice, absolutely. Like when Gary was saying, it's not something when they do and they're like, oh, what happened? What happened? I had no clue. No, you know what you're doing. They know what they're doing. They're doing it because they can. They're doing it because they probably groomed people around them by doing little things that people either didn't pay attention to or ignored or didn't realize what was going on, and they keep pushing boundaries to see how far they can go. That's a grooming process. And it sounds like, if you listen to my other video with fraternities, the interpersonal violence that goes in there, that is definitely grooming behavior of having people who are going to be hazed, the initiants and the teacher and the fool, and they all kind of just test each other's boundaries to see how far they can go. And that is a grooming process. Grooming does not just apply to human trafficking or sex trafficking or pedophilia. Grooming is very broad and it ranges in all aspects. Grooming even happens at work. Well, this is how it's done. Oh, can you do this extra shift? Well, everyone else does. Okay, I'll do it this time. Remember last time you did? Well, can you do it again? Like, that is pushing boundaries. And just a little FYI, I plan on doing a little, not a little, but I would like to, with my 13 subscribers, holla, waddy waddy woohoo, 13, I will go ahead, I'm going to do a live eventually, shortly, but I kind of want to zhuzh up my space before I go ahead and do that. And if I can have a reason to zhuzh up my space, I'm going to take it. So I just started organizing a little bit more and I picked out some colors. So I'm really excited about that. And so I will definitely be doing lives and showing myself, but I just kind of wanted to set the stage a little bit. I like a good project, and I like a good project that I start and finish. So this way I kind of make myself start it and finish it. So it's kind of twofold that way. So I'm bringing this up right here. Miss Mary Ellen O'Toole.
It has been more than a week's
determination, and were they all equally targeted? And the way that assessment has to be made is to see if any of the victims were treated differently in that crime scene. Well, there are a couple of things that really stand out to me. And I know investigators said that the victims were targeted, and that's a behavioral term that has a lot of meaning to me. So the question is, how are they making
about this case and what investigators are looking for?
I wonder if it's because the pointer is on.
There are a couple of things that really stand out to me.
Okay. So I brought that up because Mary Ellen said how the victims were targeted, which she says is a behavioral aspect. It's a part that tells you something about them, the perpetrator that tells you something about them. What are their characteristics? What are their identifiable needs? So when they say that there's none, it's too complex, I don't know. There's motives. People have motives. It's either money, food, shelter, jealousy. You have to think basic motivations that a college student would have. And jealousy is there, money, and maybe a grudge of some sorts. Maybe someone did someone to who they loved and they're getting back for them. You know, there is a motivational factor, and if it's targeted, that means there's a rationale. There's definitely a individualistic rationale of why they did this, which she brings that up because it's targeted. And here is it's on their Facebook page of MPD. And I bring this up because they say here that this is when they're going to take the victims' clothings out of the house. They're doing it this day, and please respect them doing it. You know, don't take pictures, so on and so forth. And they went ahead and let them know they're doing this, but they're still asking for more tips, more information. And they have continued processing and working through more than 2,645 email tips, 2,770 phone tips, and 1,084 digital media submissions. We believe someone has information that will add content to the picture investigators are creating of what occurred that evening. I don't like those words. I don't like that one bit. Create a picture? No, you want to create a timeline. You want to create a timeline. And that timeline, you find out information, details to support that timeline. Our focus is the investigation, not the activities. The activities is part of the investigation. Your information, whether you believe it is significant or not, might be one of the puzzle pieces that help solve these murders. Tips. Detectives are looking for context to the events and people involved in these murders to assist with the ongoing investigation. Any odd or out-of-the-ordinary events that took place should be reported. Our focus is the investigation, not the activities. Your information, whether you believe is significant or not, might be a piece. Did they just repeat themselves over and over again? What the heck is that? It's just words. We don't want the actual truth. We want just to keep giving us stuff. Don't tell us about the activities or the events that happen up to it. We just want the tips. It's very frustrating. And it's very frustrating as a parent that I'm hearing this.
And I know
I could not imagine what those families are going through right now, hearing how this investigation's going. I'm pissed, and I'm not even I'm a victim of knowing that this is going on. That's not really a victim, but it really hurts my brain and my insides that this is how people conduct their lives. This is how you act. This is how you act. This is how you act, and this is how you write. Oh, geez Louise. There are no specific combinations of traits or characteristics shown to differentiate serial killers from other violent offenders. There is no generic template for a serial killer. Serial killers are driven by their own unique motives or reasons. Hello. Serial killers are not limited to any specific demographic group, such as their sex, age, race, or religion. The majority of serial killers who are sexually motivated eroticize violence during development. For them, violence and sexual gratification are inexplicably intertwined in their psyche. More research is needed to identify specific pathways of development that produce serial killers. Yes, you do. You can't just write it off and say, well, it's so complex. I believe they were saying that, looking back and thinking about it, it's because the police officers aren't able to do that, which is fine to an extent, but to be able to just do the basic fundamentals of getting the meat and potatoes in your affidavit of what you see, I'm sure some of it's redacted. Obviously it is because of what is needed, but I don't need to know about half of the affidavit is about what the car was doing and where it was going. I need to know more about the crime scene. And I think as a public, we should know, just so that we are aware of what happened there, so that if it happens around us, we can be like, oh my gosh, that's what happened over there. If you keep things in the dark, it makes it suspicious on their ends. It's gatekeeping. Gatekeeping, no one likes gatekeeping. And gatekeeping is a power move. And it's a very ugly one. Usually it's kind of petty on petty stuff, but you can't be doing gatekeeping on the big stuff. When it's concerning safety and security. Psychopathy and serial murder. Gets me revved up. Revved. Alright, he talks about psychopathy here. And it's a serial killer. Differ in many ways, including their motivations for killing and their behavior at the crime scene. However, attendees did identify certain traits common to some serial murders, including sensation-seeking, a lack of remorse or guilt, impulsivity, the need for control, and predatory behavior. These traits and behaviors are consistent with the psychopathic personality disorder. Attendees felt it was very important for law enforcement and other professionals in the criminal justice system to understand psychopathy and its relationship to serial murder. Psychopathy is a personality disorder manifested in people who use a mixture of charm, manipulation, intimidation, and occasionally violence to control others in order to satisfy their own selfish needs. Although the concept of psychopathy has been known for centuries, Dr. Robert Hare led the modern research effort to develop a series of assessment tools to evaluate the personality traits and behaviors attributed to psychopaths. Dr. Hare and his associates developed the Psychopathic Checklist Revised, the PCLR, and its derivatives, which provide a clinical assessment of the degree of psychopathy an individual possesses. These instruments measure the distinct cluster of personality traits and socially deviant behaviors of an individual, which fall into 4 factors: interpersonal, affective, lifestyle, and antisocial. So the interpersonal traits include glibness, superficial charm, a grandiose sense of self-worth, pathological lying, and the manipulation of others. The affective traits include a lack of remorse and/or guilt, shallow affect, a lack of empathy, and failure to accept responsibility. The lifestyle behaviors include stimulation-seeking behavior, impulsivity, irresponsibility, parasitic orientation, and a lack of realistic life goals. The antisocial behaviors include poor behavioral controls, early childhood behavior problems, juvenile delinquency, revocation of conditional release, and criminal versatility. The combination of these individual personality traits, interpersonal styles, and socially deviant lifestyles are the framework of a psychopathic and can manifest themselves differently in individual psychopaths. Psychopathy. I mispronounced that. Well, I can see them having definitely the superficial charm. Definitely if they're in a fraternity, grandiose sense of self-worth. We saw all of them in those body cam videos. If you watch them, if you haven't, please do. There is a plethora of them, and definitely all of them lied to the police right to their faces. I don't know. I mean, that's a lot to unravel right there. I'm sure there's quite the dynamic there of history between the MPD and the Greek Council. The Greek Council seems to have a lot of power on that campus. The manipulation we saw, especially with 1122, how we saw Maddie, Zana, and Kaylee have to be pretty much reprimanded by MPD, and then later on you see Bethany and Dylan go ahead and crank up the tunes on that big JBL for them to come back. So that's definitely a manipulation. They're aware that cops are there for noise, and then they pump up the volume. I mean, hello. The lack of remorse and or guilt, shallow affect, lack of empathy, failure. I can't really know that from on the outside point of view. The lifestyle, stimulation seeking behavior, definitely got to be drug use. Impulsivity, same thing. Poor behavioral control, definitely can see that. In the antisocial, I don't really see it that much with definitely with the 4 victims, but the people around them, they're all part of the Greek life. So you definitely need to be social, a little too social. An abundance of socialness goes on there. Research has demonstrated that in those offenders who are psychopathic, scores vary, ranging from a high degree of psychopathy to some measure of psychopathy. However, not all violent offenders are psychopaths, and not all psychopaths are violent offenders. If violent offenders are psychopathic, they are able to assault, rape, and murder without concern for legal, moral, or social consequences. This allows them to do what they want whenever they want. So there was no signs of sexual assault that we're told. And definitely whoever did this had no concern about getting caught, or they believed that they wouldn't get caught because they're that well connected for whatever reason, or they knew the environment they were in, they would be protected. Psychopaths who commit serial murder do not value human life and are extremely callous in their interactions with their victims. This is particularly evident in sexually motivated serial killers who repeatedly target, stalk, and assault and kill without a sense of remorse.
Jonathan.
Understanding psychopathy becomes particularly critical to law enforcement during a serial murder investigation and upon the arrest of a psychopathic serial killer. The crime scene behavior of psychopaths is likely to be distinct from other offenders. This distinct behavior can assist law enforcement in linking serial cases. Hopefully they got all the deets. Psychopaths are not sensitive to altruistic interview themes such as sympathy for their victims or remorse, guilt over their crimes. They do possess certain personality traits that can be exploited, particularly their inherent narcissism, selfishness, and vanity. Specific themes in past successful interviews of psychopathic serial killers focused on praising their intelligence, cleverness, and skill in evading capture. So, I don't know. Attendees recognize that more research is needed concerning the links between serial murder and psychopaths in order to understand their frequency and degree of psychopathy among serial murders. They may assist law enforcement in understanding and identifying serial murders. Well, that's only if law enforcement is willing to learn. If they know all the answers, they know what they're doing. I got it under control. Well, you're not learning if that's your attitude. Motivations and types of serial murder, the symposium model. So over the past 20 years, law enforcement and experts from a number of varying disciplines have attempted to identify specific motivations for serial murders and to apply those motivations to different typologies developed by classifying serial murderers. These range from simple, definitive models to complex, multiple category typologies that are laden with inclusion requirements. Most typologies are too cumbersome to be utilized by law enforcement during an active serial murder investigation, and they may be not helpful in identifying an offender. So he talks about inclusion, how someone talked about that they believed that it was a disgruntled female who went after the other females, and he was trying to do inclusion criteria. And so here, it says right here that they range from simple, definitive models to complex, multi-categorical typologies that are laden with inclusion requirements. So
expect to be seen, and it is a fit of rage argument or something that inflamed it as though he was wanting to make it an exclusive or all-inclusive type of thing. I don't think that's the case. I'm pretty sure that this was a young male, somebody who could get into the house and get out in that neighborhood without being seen. I don't think it was two people, because the more people you have going into that house, the more likely that it is that they were going to be seen. So I think it's one male, young enough to have been in that neighborhood. I think the potential is that they entered from the second floor because the first floor was never disturbed, and there's also a wooded area behind that house. But here's an important thing that I think people should realize. This is probably not the first time that this person did this. As I explained before, this is an adrenaline-filled incident. When somebody goes in and they kill, especially with a knife, there's a tremendous amount of adrenaline that goes into this. And to do that 4 times in one event shows that this person has most likely not done this before. So people need to realize this individual is probably odd. He's probably shown some type of behavior that people think is strange or menacing when they're close to them.
Okay, so we got a little soundbite right there. The attendees at the symposium discussed the issues surrounding motivation and the use of typologies to categorize varying types of serial murder. Identifying motivations in the investigation of crime is a standard procedure for law enforcement. Typically, motivation provides police with the means to narrow the potential suspect pool. Well, apparently they went straight to Brian Koberger. The same logical steps are taken when investigating homicide cases. As most homicides are committed by someone known to the victim, police focus on the relationships closest to the victim. This is a successful strategy for most murder investigations. The majority of serial murders, however, are not acquainted with or involved in a consensual relationship with their victims. So, right away, the MPD cleared everyone that was close to them. The people in the house, Aunt Dylan and Bethany, Aunt Jack Showalter, Aunt. They took a little bit longer on Jack, which, okay, but 10 days later, Jack DeCoeur, Aunt, left, right, done. Very peculiar. For the most part, serial murder involves strangers with no visible relationship between the offender and the victim. Which makes more sense. If it's a serial murder, they just pick a specific type. They have blonde hair, or they're brunette, or they're a certain height, or whatnot, what have you. It involves strangers with no visible relationship between the offender and the victim. This distinguishes a serial murder investigation as a more nebulous undertaking than that of other crimes. So, since the investigations generally lack an obvious connection between the offender and the victim, investigators instead attempt to discern the motivations behind the murders as a way to narrow the investigation focus. And they did look into those stabbings of the couple while they were sleeping shortly after, I want to say the following month, December 13th, and they found no connection with that. Serial murder crime scenes can have bizarre features that may cloud the identification of a motive. The behavior of a serial murder at a crime scene may evolve throughout the series of crimes and manifest different interactions between an offender and victim. It is also extremely difficult to identify a single motivation where there is more than one offender involved in the series. The attendees at this symposium made the following observation. Motive generally may be difficult to determine in a serial murder investigation. A serial murderer may have multiple motives for committing his crimes. A serial murderer's motives may evolve both within a single murder as well as throughout the murder series. The classification of motivation should be limited to observable behavior at the crime scene. Objective, observing. Details. Just what you see, what you clearly see, and describe. Lying on the floor to lying on the bed. Was their head at the head of the bed? Was their foot at the foot of the bed? None of that information. And I mean, personally, I don't know, but if I was a family member who had this happen to a family member, or if someone from my family, if this happened to them, I know I'm more medically inclined, so I'm able to remove myself. I have to be objective, especially when you take care of other people or you are in charge of other people. You have to take away your own biases and just be there objectively. But if I was reading that my family member was in the scene and they did details of the head was at the head of the bed, the feet were laying off of the bed, I don't think that's disrespectful. Clothes were torn, or the sheets were this, like stuff like that. There's so much more information you can grab from there than just the actual of the stabbings. Was the door ajar? Was their furniture moved? Were things broken? Were their clothes strewn? They made it sound like it was just nice, clean, and tidy, wrapped up in a pretty little bow. Even if a motive can be identified, it may not be helpful in identifying a serial murderer. Utilizing investigative resources to discern the motive instead of identifying the offender may derail the investigation. Okay, let me read that again. Utilizing investigative resources to discern the motive instead of identifying the offender may derail the investigation. Look at that. I like that right there. Utilizing investigative resources to discern the motive instead of identifying the offender may derail the investigation. Because of the way that PCA was written, the affidavit, you barely got any information on those victims. Barely. It's a page or two. And then the rest of it is all about getting the offender. The car, the cell phone, the way they were driving, it was all about that. Utilizing the investigative resources to discern the motive instead of identifying the offender may derail the investigation. So the way you can identify the offender is by looking at the crime scene. Am I missing something? We heard that with the Jack the Ripper, with the criminal profile, all that information. The way they were laying, the way the sheet was this, that, and the other thing. I'm like stuck on that for some reason. It's taking me a moment. And I've had a glass of wine on top of it, so that probably doesn't help, but utilizing investigative resources to recognize the motive instead of identifying the offender may derail the investigation. Observable behavior of the crime scene. Motive generally may be difficult to determine in serial murder investigations. So, utilizing investigative resources to perceive the motive instead of identifying the offender may derail the investigation. So is this a serial murder investigation? Is that why they went straight to that? They just went straight to finding him and not using the resources to discern the motive. But we heard the motive big time. It was he is an incel. He was jealous. He was stalking them. He had cameras in their house watching them. They had all that. So they made the motive, that was him. They identified the motive, which was him, and did not pay any attention to everything else.
And I would advise people.
Let me know in the comments if you've gotten this far. Investigators should not necessarily equate a serial murderer's motivation with the level of injury. Regardless of the motive, serial murderers commit their crimes because they want to. The exception of this would be those few killers suffering from a severe mental illness. Okay, so this is what I'm thinking, because we're looking at it from the depth of a police officer who, because they're trying to mend the fence between police and people who have experience with this. They're telling them this is what you need to do. Investigators should not necessarily equate serial murder's motivation with the level of injury. So that could be why they were not expressing the type of stabs. That's why you had Anne and Gary go ahead and express that if the stabbing was on the chest or in the head, it was a significance as compared to just in the stomach and all over the place, which is what they said about Jack the Ripper. Bond was his name. He had no anatomical understanding. Like, he wasn't like a butcher or someone who knew about like the femoral artery, the carotid artery, the brachial, all that stuff to help bleed. It was kind of just random. But they found out over the years that people who specifically just target the chest and the neck and the face, that means something. That is more of a underlying of a sexual homicide. So they don't want the police officers to really look into that too much, but you should also put that information down so that it's needed for next ones. Don't so much try to like look into it and figure it out, but just write down that information and just don't start making perceptions and hunches based off that. That's what I think what that means. Don't think too much in it. Just write down the information, write it down clearly so that it is put into the databases so that if it happens again and when it happens again, that we have those specifics in there for if and when it happens again. To tell the law enforcement to not jump to conclusions, so to speak. That makes sense. Let me know in the comment if I'm on the right track with that. Regardless of motive, serial murderers commit their crimes because they want to. The exception is if yada yada yada. To assist law enforcement in narrowing the pool of suspects, attendees at the symposium suggested that broad, non-inclusive categories of motivations be utilized as guidelines for investigation. The following categories listed below represent general categories and are not intended to be a complete measure of serial offenders or their motivation. So anger is a motivation in which an offender displays rage or hostility towards a certain subgroup of the population or with society as a whole. Criminal enterprise is a motivation in which the offender benefits in status or monetary compensation by committing murder that is drug, gang, or organized crime related. Possibly they were saying the drug, or if it's Sigma Chi to prove themselves, or the benefit in status or monetary compensation which would be like the financial gain, motivation in which the offender benefits monetarily from killing. Example of these types of crimes are Black Widow killings, robbery homicides, or multiple killings involving insurance or welfare fraud, which is not this in particular that we know of. But who knows? They said Kaylee was making $100,000 a year. Ideology is motivation to commit murders in order to further the goals and ideas of a specific individual or group. Example of these include terrorist groups or individuals who attacks a specific racial, gender, or ethnic group. Power thrill, which is what the former FBI agents are saying, which they almost seem like talking heads at points. I mean, I hate to say that, but it's getting to that point, especially nowadays. Is motivation in which the offender feels empowered and or excited when he kills his victims. Psychosis is a situation in which the offender is suffering from a severe mental illness and is killing because of that illness. This may include auditory and or visual hallucinations and paranoia, grandiose or bizarre delusions. And sexually based is a motivation driven by the sexual needs, desires of the offender. There may or may not be overt sexual contact reflected in the crime scene. And so that's what Jonathan Gillum, Sheep No More, was saying, how it was an overt. Oh, it was not overt. The overt killer, he was saying, was at who did the Walmart shootings, so on and so forth. I'm not quite sure what he was saying there, but this is what I was mentioning. Is it took me a minute to get to this point because there's different terminology being used, and it's being used but not fully being used, or it's kind of on the gray line. So moving forward. An offender selects a victim regardless of the category, based upon availability, vulnerability, and desirability. Availability is explained as the lifestyle of the victim or circumstances in which the victim is involved that allow the offender access to the victim. Vulnerability is defined as the degree to which the victim is susceptible to attack by the offender. Desirability is described as the appeal of the victim to the offender. Desirability involves numerous factors based upon the motivation of the offender and may include factors dealing with the race, gender, ethnic background, age of the victim, or other specific preferences the offender determines. So definitely they were vulnerable. They were in bed. They went out. They had a good weekend. They went to the football game. They went to the ball. They went to the bar, the corner club, they went to the grub chucks, so they went home, went to bed, so they're vulnerable there. They were under the influence, which is legal, and women are allowed to drink and have a good time, and they had a ride there and back. So I don't like hearing people using that as an excuse. That's terrible. Like the Big J guy on his TikTok saying, I had no idea what was going on. They were drunk, I was not. But he was clocking them big time. He was constantly watching them. So that's a little weird for someone to be there saying that he wasn't drinking and he's hanging around college girls at night, getting food, looking around. That's weird. Investigative issues and best practices. Okay, here we go. So, investigative issues and best practices. Attendees at the symposium identified successful investigative practices for solving serial murder cases. These factors were essential to the discussions. Identification of a serial murder series, leadership, task force organization, resource augmentation, communication, data management, analytical tools, medical examiners, coroners, administrative issues, training, and officer assistant programs. Identification. Symposium participants listed the initial identification of a homicide series as the primary investigative challenge. Historically, the first indication that a serial murder was at work was when two or more cases were linked by forensic or behavioral evidence. Identifying a homicide series is easier in rapidly developing high-profile cases involving low-risk victims. These cases are reported to law enforcement upon discovery of the crimes and draw immediate media attention. In contrast, identifying a series involving high-risk victims in multiple jurisdictions is you never know. But it seems like it's as what Officer Fry said, it is a targeted attack. I think I wrote it down somewhere. It's an isolated, targeted attack. So that sounds like it was specifically at that house of those people. So here they talk more about attendees stress the importance of law enforcement networking with other investigative agencies and cited the National Law Enforcement Teletype System. VICAP alerts the law enforcement online and the use of the FBI's NCAVC, both the behavioral analysis units and violent criminal apprehension programs. And then goes into leadership. So here is on VICAP, which I like.
Connection between a missing Wisconsin family and a bag of bones found over 1,000 miles. This is the scene of a violent crime. It could be a murder. It could be a sexual assault. It could be a hit and run. These investigators are gathering evidence. Until recently, the evidence gathered would only be used in this one case. But now the rules have changed. VICAP, on the trail of violence. VICAP is the FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program. It is the cutting edge of law enforcement technology. It's the engine that found this railway killer.
Anybody that lived near railroad tracks was scared.
It discovered the connection between a missing Wisconsin family and a bag of bones found over 1,000 miles away.
There were several skull fractures. The medical examiner deemed that it was blunt force to the head.
It identified a Jane Doe killed by a hit-and-run driver 14 years earlier.
So I was just beside myself, and I was sitting there poring over what I had, and I was really coming up with no matches.
The Violent Criminal Apprehension Program is a sophisticated computer database that is virtually unknown, even to many law enforcement agencies.
VICAP is really nothing more than an advanced software system. It looks at the behavior characteristics of violent crimes, the instruments, the tools that were used to commit the assault, where the victim met the suspect, where the victim was last seen, the position of the victim's body when it was found.
VICAP has been instrumental in solving many previously unsolvable cases. Perhaps the most spectacular is the case of Angel Resendez, also known as Rafael Ramirez, the railway killer. August 29, 1997. University of Kentucky student Christopher Meyer and his girlfriend Holly Dunn are attacked while walking along railroad tracks in Lexington, Kentucky.
They were confronted by the offender who assaulted them, bound them, killed Mr. Meyer, and then sexually assaulted and attempted to kill Holly Dunn. Luckily, she survived her wounds and was able to provide information of value to investigators.
The police in Lexington enter details of the crime into the VICAP system. Nearly a year and a half later, another body is found near railroad tracks, this time in a suburb of Houston, Texas. Dr. Claudia Benton had been raped, stabbed, and clubbed in the head as many as 19 times. This time, the killer leaves a clue. Benton's car was stolen from the garage. Police recovered the car and ID'd fingerprints as those of Angel Maturino Resendez.
We knew that he had a lengthy history of criminality going across the border. And certainly this individual was not a stranger to committing almost any type of offense if it would gain him some advantage or some financial gain.
The FBI's Critical Incident Response Group, or CIRG, joins the investigation. They determined that the perpetrator in both cases acted in the same way.
For the most part, he would maximize on the cover and concealment of his approach. He would usually approach and assault during the cover of darkness. All those things are done to minimize the probability of being identified or apprehended. He also would target strangers. Once he determined that these strangers were also vulnerable, either because they were elderly or because they were asleep or both, he would then proceed to assault killed and then sexually assaulted after death.
Unfortunately, without more information, the FBI was unable to definitively link the Houston and Lexington murders. The crimes are similar, but aside from the proximity to railroad tracks, the crimes are similar to many other cases as well. Meanwhile, murders continued. May 2nd, 1999. At the United Church of Christ in Weimar, Texas, a parishioner finds the Reverend Norman Cernick, 46, and his wife Karen, 47, bludgeoned to death in the church's parsonage,
It's another couple.
located near railroad tracks.
The offender came in to the Cernick's residence and while they were asleep, assaulted and killed both of them and then sexually assaulted Mrs. Cernick.
With 3 crimes all entered into the VICAP system, the VICAP unit has enough information in its database to begin an analysis of the crimes.
The match comes back and we realize that we've got cases in Texas, we've got cases in Kentucky. This is a railroad transient, so obviously he's crisscrossing the country and the search begins.
The VICAP team, working with the SERG unit, linked Angel Mantorino Resendez to all 3 crimes. The FBI finally had a suspect. In order to track him down, Resendez is placed on the FBI's top 10 list. While the investigation continues, still more murders are connected to Resendez.
Certainly early on we thought that he was capable behaviorally of double digits in the teens. I think that right now best estimates are still in the teens, probably 14, 15.
Officers blanket a swath of...
All right, so right there we just heard, the talking points. Financial gain, vulnerability, bludgeoning, 2 couples, by the railroad. So those are important details to figure out if they are little techniques or traits that he has that you can figure out if it's the same person. There is that one that was off a little, but they can be off in their in the way they do things as well. So I liked how they said, the representatives on there said what we just went through on here so far, which is promising. I like it. Leadership. High-profile investigations present a multitude of leadership challenges for law enforcement, from investigators to police executives. Law enforcement personnel may face external pressures from political entities, victims' families, and the media. Collectively, strong management throughout the chain of command must continually reinforce the supreme goal of the investigation: to arrest and prosecute the offender. Amen, and that's just across the board. Great leadership is very needed in order for anything to really run properly. If you work anywhere that has a great manager or a great supervisor, you really appreciate it so much, and you really put in the effort, and you come into work and you do what you need to do. If the management is kind of lacking, it just makes things such a headache. No bueno.
Territory from the Midwest.
No bueno. Attendees at the symposium agreed that in successful serial murder investigations, the roles of both investigators and supervisors were clearly delineated. The investigative function is the primary mission, and all other activities are in support of that mission. In serial murder cases, the actual investigation should be directed by competent homicide investigators who have the experience to direct and focus the investigative process. Law enforcement administrators should not run the investigation, but rather ensure that the investigators have the resources to do their job. Supervisors should also act as buffers between investigators and the other levels of command. There are several other strategies law enforcement executives may consider while preparing for these intensive investigations. So completing the memorandums of understanding between different law enforcement agencies. So you got to know what everyone's role is and what they have to offer and what they can do and what they cannot do. Identify all resources that may be needed during the investigation and maintaining them, a detailed list. Establishing good working relationships with other departments. Prior to the crisis, some interpersonal skilling going on there. I feel like that is used up more than is needed at times. provide training opportunities in the latest techniques and methods of homicide investigations. Additional observations regarding leadership and task force operations include communication on administrative issues should be restricted to management personnel on the various agencies so as not to distract investigators. The intense pressure in high-profile investigations may at times decrease logical decision-making. Very true. Tunnel vision and impulsivity should be avoided. Like I was saying, it gets to be so... things happen so quickly and so much, you have to be grounded and you have to go into those methodologies and those processes to help ground you so that you don't lose it and start just spinning and making mistakes and then skipping steps and not having control of the situation. Law Enforcement Administration and each of the participating law enforcement agencies should present a unified front by agreeing to a written investigative strategy that outlines the investigative goals, the roles of the agencies, and establishes a clear and concise chain of command. Command staff should focus on providing and managing the resources investigators need to solve the case, rather than directing the investigation. A major problem identified by attendees at this symposium was the issue of micromanagement. When a supervisor attempts to personally direct every action in an investigation, rather than allowing investigators to perform their jobs independently, they exacerbate problems in these high-profile investigations. Well, I can understand that. If there's such a disconnect between law enforcement and other agencies or professionals, people who have experience, I could see leadership being a little flustered with that. I would get that. You have to be a really good leader. You have to know your investigators inside and out, how they work, how they think, how they function, how they're able to, what their, how much energy they can give when they burn out, when they best work. Are they best work in the morning, in the afternoon? You really have to know your people. You have to, it's like a players, like on a basketball team or a hockey team. You have to know, like I played sports, you have to know what players' strengths and weaknesses are, and you play off their strengths and then you try to help them with their weaknesses. While law enforcement attracts positive individuals with strong personalities, management should encourage all involved personnel to leave their egos at the door. Little reminder here. This ensures that personality differences among investigators do not become a distraction to the investigation. Okay. Investigators who lack the ability to collaborate with colleagues can hinder the investigation and should not be assigned. You think? Task force organization. I try not to be too snarky and that's just common sense. You would think that's common sense. I understand you lose your mind a little bit when you have like this crazy pressure that this happened. But at the same time, you need to know when to check yourself. We're adults here. You're getting paid to police. And I understand at times when your job becomes like more about the BS than the actual like work, and you end up, when the actual work comes, you're so exhausted and burned out from the BS. I get that. But it's time to switch gears. Switch it up. Work needs to be done. Task force organization. Once a serial murder series has been identified, it is important for the involved law enforcement agencies to work together. There are a number of operational and investigative issues critical to the successful establishment of an investigative task force. So we don't know if this is a serial murder. It looks like it's kind of being addressed that way because it's an isolated targeted attack of 4 people. You have the former FBI saying that they've definitely done it before, but not to this much. So they're treating it as that, not as a mass murder motivated by sexually motivated. It's more going towards this direction, which is why I'm doing this. And this is the methodology of it, so we're going in this direction. Initially, a lead agency for the task force should be designated and will assume the primary investigative role. The choice of a lead agency is based upon a number of factors, including the number and viability of the cases, available resources, and investigative experiences. An effective and reliable investigative model identifies a lead investigator and co-investigator who, regardless of rank, are given complete control of the investigation. If the flow of incoming information becomes unmanageable due to an excessive influx of investigative tips, the lead investigators can delegate this responsibility to an experienced investigator who will act as a lead control officer. Consequently, law enforcement administrators must assign the most qualified investigators to lead the current case. The lead investigators must have the experience, dedication, and tenacity to direct all aspects of the investigation. They should also, with management support, have the ability to select a cadre of investigators and support personnel and assign such personnel as the investigative dictates. Well, that's like a leader, like I was just mentioning. You have to know who you work with, what their strengths, what their weaknesses, and work together as a team. I don't know if MPD is doing that. I have a hard time thinking that. I really do. Not all of them can be Russ and Marty. That is fictional, yes, I know, but still. In serial murder investigations, the lead investigator must handle all crime scene activities and related leads, as each incident may be interwoven. It is the responsibility of the lead investigators or the lead control investigator to ensure relevant information is distributed to the entire task force. At the onset of the task force, the lead investigators should immediately implement a pre-planned task force model. Common to most models is the need to establish an information management system to track tips and leads in the case. This computer system should account for the idiosyncrasies of the investigation while being flexible enough to handle any contingency. All personnel should be familiar with its operation, and it should be pre-tested to ensure viability. And now that is a well-organized machine if they can do all that. Primary to the investigation is sufficient manpower to successfully investigate and prosecute the case. The overwhelming consensus from the attendees is that the assignment of excessive number of personnel to investigation may be counterproductive. There we go. There was like 40 FBI agents in there. And then we're going to read how many investigators, how many police, how many detectives, how many behavioral science. It's a lot. You have all these people for the 4. I mean, I understand you need more to help with the matter that there's 4 of them, but I would be interested to know if what's the median of one when there's 1 murder, 1 homicide. How many are there for the 1? And I'm sure once the profile is of that person, I'm sure it changes as well. But I like to know what the mean is. I think it's the mean, right? The mean median mode? I think it's the mean. What's the average? What's the average personnel that works in a single homicide case? Whew. A small group of experienced homicide investigators under the direction of the lead investigator is far more effective than a large number of less experienced investigators or investigators who are experienced in different areas of criminal activity. Yeah, you gotta organize. You gotta organize and subgroup and really hone in on that. Whew. Okay, here we go. Whew. So here is the assignment of liaison personnel in a serial homicide case is highly recommended. The highest priority is the families of the victims, who will be supportive of the investigative efforts. When they believe in the investigators are competent and all available resources are being used to identify and arrest the offender. Thank you. This is what we've been saying, and this is what the Gonsalves have been saying. An investigator with exceptional interpersonal communication skills should be assigned to maintain constant contact with the families, keeping them apprised of the progress of the investigation and any pending press releases. This is what I was saying in my other one, that I couldn't think of the word liaison, but I'm like, I think he would have someone like would be just for the families that will call them every day, let them know what's going on, let them know that they got this in and they got that and they're looking here and they're looking there, let them know that you're working the case properly, and let them know ahead of time that you're releasing stuff. And they clearly did not do that with Steve, because they would ask him, they're like, yeah, well, I was told this, but then they did a press release and they said that. That's just, you have a hard time respecting a department when they act like that. It's like pettiness. I feel like it's pettiness. It's small town pettiness. Now I'm getting rubbed. Liaisons must be maintained within numerous support entities, both inside and outside. The task force included the prosecutor's office, the forensic laboratory, the medical examiner's office, and surrounding law enforcement agencies. Additionally, a list of available experts in specific forensic and related fields should be compiled and liaison established for use in investigation. As long as the flow of information is manageable, one individual can be assigned to multiple liaison duties. I mean, right there. The highest priority is the families of the victims, who will be supportive of the investigative efforts when they believe the investigators are competent and are available resources and are being used to identify and arrest the offender. So here we go. This was the 23rd, where they talked to CNN.
When we're looking for any of those things,
about
I
the
do
timeline.
feel it is valuable, and they did get home at 1:56. It was not 1:45.
Right. Well, there's one detail there.
That's a big
Kaylee's
detail.
mother has said she believes that the suspect, the killer, is someone Kaylee knew very well, and that the killer might even be at the vigil. Remarkable. I wonder, Steve, do you share that view?
It's speculation. My daughter was very popular. It seemed like everyone that I talked to said she knew everyone. They had parties. They were college kids. They were about to graduate. So somebody could have partied in the house and got an idea or got the confidence to pull that off.
Steve, this question of a stalker, and I'm very conscious with this story.
And he says he's not aware of it. And I did spend some time on stalking, and I did that because I wanted to inform people about stalking. And I'm going to continue with that. I just brazed on that a little bit, just brushed on that. I really didn't deep dive into it more because a lot of people don't believe it. They think it's like some silly thing, that it's not, it's make-believe, and it's not. There's a lot of stalking homicides out there. It needs to be taken very seriously, and it's unfortunate because there's so many myths about it, and there's so many their perceptions are, they just kind of just make light of it and kind of just tone it down, and you're making a big deal of it, and that's kind of the mindset for decades, that it's not that big of a deal. Just like interpersonal violence, well, that's just the way it is. And then here is on the 29th, he talks to Fox News about when the last time he spoke to him.
Well, we just had a vacation. Law enforcement told me that they were going to drop off a little bit and not to expect the same type of communication that I had gotten before. They passed it on to another person. So basically, long story short, it was Wednesday, 5 p.m. was the last time that they reached out to me. So.
And that's here this day. This is the Wednesday he spoke to them. The last time he spoke to them. This was, you can see it very faintly. It's like 7 o'clock in the morning Pacific time. And they ended up calling him at 5 o'clock at whatever his time is. And here, this is the 29th. So that was the last time that he spoke to them, was this day, after he said all that. And this was the time that he kind of exposed their dirty laundry a little bit. So do I blame him? No. But you know why he probably did that? I'm going to think because Steve is a smart guy. And, you know, I think they're kind of just, he's stressed. You know, I mean, hello, he's stressed. He is stressed the fuck out. His daughter was just murdered in her home at college. And he's not feeling that his family's getting hurt or getting justice for his daughter because he's not feeling supported by the investigative efforts. And he feels that they're not competent. And I feel like that is a lot of people thinking that as well. They have that same concern.
Yeah, that's rough.
Sir, what are they telling you?
They're kind of just telling me that they can't tell me much, which is frustrating to me because I've been very trustworthy. I do know things. I haven't shared things. We're the same family that found the original timeline. We're the same family that broke into the phones. We tried everything in our ability to try to get into this system because a court order is not the fastest thing. So we broke in and we did what we did. We know that we have some family passwords that we all share. So we broke in and we helped them. So it's hard for me to give up as a father my protective ability to other men.
Sir, they have shared with us that it was a targeted attack. Can you give us any information about that? Have they told you who the target was or given you more insight than they have the public?
I don't want to talk bad about them because these are some hardworking individuals, and I'm doomed without them. We're all doomed without them. This defund police is just a terrible idea. The fact that we're finding out that there's more than just my daughter and these children that have suffered, it's terrible to think that we can defund these guys. It's an absolute atrocity. That's not something that is
It's interesting that he just said that it's happened to my daughter and these children, that these keep going on. I feel like he's catering to police with the defund. I could see that being a huge hot topic in Moscow, Idaho. Personally, I looked at defund the police when it first originally came out, with it being more of reallocating the funds within the department to spread out the responsibility so it's not on all the police, because as we see in this, there is such a disconnect between expertise and them, and they're trying to mend or trying to build a bridge so that they're able to get these cases done and completed. So if you have more expertise in there, like social workers or medical professionals or caseworkers, or for example, here I mentioned before in the state of New York, in Western New York area, particularly in Niagara Falls, they have people that will go out to calls that are in a mental health crisis, like they're on call, and they will come out as long as the police call them. If they don't call them, then nothing happens. It's same old, and they don't get paid that much, so it's really hard to keep people in there. So, and that's like a profession. So if that money is used for that, to keep those type of professionals there, and that's going to help the police. The police have to decide, do you want to really help in these situations, or do you want to just help for situations like this? I mean, everyone needs to be honest with themselves. All right, so moving forward, and we went through the restraint must be practiced by task force administrators to avoid the use of access personnel. And in either event, the arrival of new personnel should be pre-planned and detailed case briefing provided. This briefing should include an explanation of their specific assignment, their work hours, details. So I wonder if pertains to this, where he got kind of passed on to someone else. He says he kind of got dished off to someone else, so someone else is going to be taking over the liaison between them. Whoever he was talking to before probably had enough. Probably had them since the beginning, and he's had enough of it. I get it. It's stressful. I couldn't imagine, or I probably could, but at the same time, it's not easy, especially if you're not used to being in a high-pressured situation like that. You get very tired. You don't have the stamina to withhold yourself, or the stamina to continue as long as someone else who's been in those situations for their career.
Of how many rumors have been circulating, and a lot of those rumors turn out to not be true. But Stephen, this discussion of the possibility.
All right, so communications. Attendees stress the importance of disseminating information to the investigators engaged in a serial murder investigation through the following. Daily briefings are essential for investigators, especially when there are different work shifts. Periodic summary briefings are also necessary for managers and patrol officers. These can be accomplished via email or at roll call and should be conducted by investigative personnel. Communication on the operational level is paramount, especially in task force investigations and when serial murder cases involve multiple states, which is not including this. Or we don't know. We don't know. We don't know. Submitting VICAP reports on solved and unsolved murders, attempted murders, and sexual assaults for inclusion in the VICAP database is strongly recommended and may facilitate the linkage of unknown related cases for law enforcement agencies. Data management. A common problem in serial investigations occurs when data is not entered into the electronic database in a timely manner. Useful leads are lost when investigators are overloaded with information. Bring in the tips, bring in the tips, bring in the tips. The following suggestions were provided regarding data management issues. In order to avoid time lags, reports should be written as soon as the investigative lead is completed. If reports are not finished before the end of the investigator's shift, the lead investigator or ERS may not have time to review the reports. This will lead to a backlog of reports containing pertinent and timely investigative information. Sufficient time should be allocated during work shifts to complete reports. Information should be obtained, documented, and distributed in a standardized manner to maintain consistency among different agencies. Ideally, reports should be computer generated to ease the communication issues. Systems similar to the FBI's Rapid Start computerized case management system should be utilized to effectively organize and collate lead information. Computerized systems promote the analysis of a tremendous amount of data. There should be sufficient personnel committed to ensure that data is recorded into the system in a time. We've all been saying this, like, isn't there like a method? Don't they have like an isn't there like a process? Are there processes? There are. Apparently there are. So when Bill Thompson, the prosecutor, just hands over a bunch of information, it's like, here you go, that's not following the protocol of data management in the symposium of serial murders.
The United States in 1930. The year Babyface Nelson robbed his first bank, and Bonnie met Clyde. We got our news on the corner. Our mail came in envelopes. Colonel Ed Rosler, Chief of Fairfax County Police Department in Virginia.
So we started a journey back in July of 2013 to convert to NIBRS. So what we methodically did over the next few months was to work with all of our elected officials and all our media staff that cover the greater metropolitan area that I work in. We did a side-by-side comparison to help them understand why do some of these categories look different, but also to talk about the benefits of NIBRS, where we could drill down and have deeper discussions about how we could fight crime in our community and use this information.
Because of its value, NIBRS is becoming the data standard, not only in large agencies, but also in smaller agencies. Here is Chief Luke Thompson with the Byram Police Department in Mississippi.
Our city was incorporated in 2009, and I was hired in 2010 to create our city's very first police department. We came into a community that didn't have a really well-defined problem. We knew the crime existed. We knew that we needed tools up front that would help us address those problems, help us to clearly define the problem.
Proactive.
Came from an agency that was a NIBRS agency.
So it can be done.
And saw how we used crime data there to solve problems and to fight crime in that city. So when we were looking at establishing a brand new police department, NIBRS was kind of on the forefront of our mind. We were able to find some state-level technology grant monies that allowed us to buy some computer servers and to actually purchase the initial software. And once we got through that initial setup process, and we got through that initial certification process, maintaining the NIBRS program has simply become an integral part of what we do.
Our plan is to close out summary report
by 2021. So I believe him more than I do Fry. Or, who's the other one? I wrote it down. ISP deputy, I want to say his name is. I can't remember, even though every time I watched it, they spell their name for you. There it is. Roger Lanier. So him just speaking, he felt confident. He knew what he was talking about. He didn't sound like overcompensating. He came from a place and he saw that, yeah, there's crime, but they didn't have anything. So they established this because it's going to make your life easier. It's going to make everyone's life easier if you have a system put in place. You're going to get some hiccups because it's new. Anything that you do new is just, it's difficult because you have to adapt to it. But if the leadership is willing to do it and set forth and be the example, well, then people are going to follow. Does it sound as simple as that? It does. And it is.
Reporting no later than January.
I like them apples. A murder book or series of murder books should be created and maintained. Murder books contain all of the pertinent investigative information and are traditionally in paper format, but also be developed electronically. That's when we saw that one video where everything was in paper. All rough notes should be maintained and entered into evidence. Reports should be distributed to all participating law enforcement agencies and the prosecutor's office. Analytic tools. The wide range of analytic resources available to law enforcement agencies is typically underutilized and at the onset of a serial murder investigation. There you go. Due to the volume of information, which is a characteristic of a high-profile investigation, critical lead information may be lost. The implementation of a tested and reliable case management system, as previously discussed, coupled with competent analytical staff, is imperative in serial murder investigations. They were definitely in over their heads. But that's not an excuse. You've been there for a long time. They haven't had one in 7 years. The great thing would have been like, okay, well, we're backing off for the most part, and the lead investigator was only there for like 2 years, only a police officer for 4. Yeah, he was in the military, so you would think he would be versed in the ability to be in a high pressure situation and take lead, take control, and divvy out what's needed. So his resume sounds great. Crime analysts offer critical support to investigation by developing timelines on victims and suspects, compiling matrices to highlight similar case elements, and providing general analytical support. It is recommended that a review team of experienced investigators be formed to assist the lead investigators in filtering through the information gathered by analysts. The team should consist of 2 to 4 investigators from within the involved agencies, as well as the crime analyst. The team must remain intact throughout the investigation to maintain the case integrity. Many agencies are not supported by an actual crime analysis unit or do not employ experienced analysts. In such cases, the agency should contact their neighboring jurisdictions or the FBI's National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime for assistance. Symposium attendees also discussed the importance of the behavioral aspects of the investigation and recommended the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit be utilized for the multitude of services it provides, to include crime scene analysis, offender profiles, case linkage analysis, interview strategies, and prosecution strategy. The case consultants can be conducted at the BAU office in Quantico, Virginia, which Officer Fry did mention. Or a team of BAU staff members can respond to the respective agency to personally view the crime scenes and discuss the behavioral issues with the pertinent task force members. It's a little 60 minutes.
It would be comforting to think that the movie Silence of the Lambs was pure fiction. It wasn't. It was based on real crimes in a real FBI unit, which is known affectionately as the Psycho Squad. We went to the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia, to see how the unit gets into the minds of some of the most savage serial killers and rapists, and to meet the head of the unit, FBI agent John Douglas. What I wanted to ask you about first was the movie. Did you like it?
I thought it was a tremendous movie. It was scary as heck.
You were scared?
Oh, sure.
That's great. That's
great. And because unlike the real cases, in the real cases, we don't have the music in the background.
In the movie, Douglas was played by actor Scott Glenn.
Good morning.
Morning, Mr. Crawford.
Sorry to pull you off the course at such short notice. A job's come up, and I thought about you. Not a job, really, more of an interesting errand.
As in the movie, Douglas and the other agents in his behavioral science unit, one of them played by Jodie Foster, visit prisons and interview convicted rapists and murderers to find out how they committed their vicious crimes and why.
In order to understand the murderer, you really must talk to murderers.
We learn how they think. We do try to get into their minds and think like they do. Otherwise, we couldn't do the job that we're doing.
We're looking at the probably the more violent criminals of society, the serial murderer, the serial bomber, the serial arsonist, the child molester, the kidnapper.
What I wanted to ask you about first was the movie. Did you like it?
I thought it was a tremendous movie.
Which is known affectionately as the Psycho Squad. We went to the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia, to see how the unit gets into the minds of some of the most savage serial killers and rapists, and to meet the head of the unit, FBI agent John Douglas. What I wanted to ask you about first was the movie. Did you like it?
I thought it was a tremendous movie. It was scary as heck.
You were scared?
Oh, sure.
That's great. That's
and
great.
Because unlike the real cases, in the real cases, we don't have the music in the background.
In the movie, Douglas was played by actor Scott Glenn.
Good morning.
Morning, Mr. Crawford.
Sorry to pull you off the course at such short notice.
So it's based on an actual incident. And then, if you remember in the beginning of this, they were saying that it's glamorized by Hollywood, and it's not like that. So which one is it? Which one is it? So I had to bring that in there. Because I'm reading this, and they're saying, oh, it's glorified, Hollywood glorifies it, it's this, that, and the other thing. And then you go here, and it's like, oh, yeah, it actually was an incident. Oh, like that. I'm sure it was heightened a little bit, but the premise is real. That dude was played by that dude, the FBI agent, the Psycho Squad. It was a real thing. Medical examiners, coroners. A thorough autopsy and the subsequent collection of evidence are critical in serial murder investigations. Medical examiners and coroners operate according to their different state mandates and vary as to the thoroughness of their investigation. Well, we know that didn't happen. They have no information. They said they took no pictures. They did not record. They didn't do notes. They did nothing. And when the defense team asked for it, they said it was with the county, even though they had a press conference saying that the lead detectives had that information. So, there you go.
Jobs come up and I thought...
So here we're going to focus on investigators should also ensure the entry of the unidentified remains recovered into the National Crime Information Center, the NCIC, and the VICAP. So that includes submissions of all unidentified victims to the FBI laboratories, National Missing Persons DNA database, medical examiners should share information on autopsies and potentially related cases. Joint meetings within investigators can provide additional background information on these cases. So is that including DNA for the 3 unknown males?
So if an officer inappropriately accesses NCIC, it's basically a level 1. But then if they do something with the information that's inappropriate, what you may not be seeing in those disciplines is people who get a lot more time based on what it is they do with information.
Yeah, based on what they do with that information, like passing it on to a friend or doing all sorts of other things with
well, it really
depends.
And so I'm sure you've reviewed some of these, and there's people, and let me just say right off the bat, it's wrong, it's inappropriate, and we deal with it. But if someone uses NCIC to try to see if their neighbor has a warrant, that's not appropriate. It's not an official law enforcement action. But if they realize that that's not a good thing, and they come in and they say, I shouldn't have done this, that's handled at one level. But if an officer does something, for a family member, trying to help them out in a bad situation, and they use that information in that way, well, that's going to be addressed in a higher level of discipline.
So it really depends on the level of discipline that is administered, how they use that private information.
Correct. So that would push it up into another category, and it would no longer be called an NCIC violation. So I kind of want to warn you, Jeremy, that you may not be looking at everything that's has this included in it. Some of these cases, in fact, we've had officers who are facing criminal violations, serious criminal violations, where an NCIC violation is pretty minor compared to the rest of what's happening. So it kind of gets caught up in that whole bigger case, and you may not be seeing that we addressed it very seriously.
Okay, all right. Is it okay for police to use NCIC to find dates?
No.
Is it okay for police to look up ex-girlfriends?
Not at all. It's absolutely inappropriate.
Can police use it to look up family members?
Nope. NCIC is pretty clear what you can and cannot do.
Can police use it to help their friends get revenge?
Nope.
NCIC abuse is against the law, correct?
It is against the law, but there's a lot of things that are against the law. I want to remind you too. But the district attorney may not choose to prosecute if they feel like it can be handled better in another way. And I would just say that that's absolutely true. Speeding is against the law, but not everybody gets a ticket.
Sure.
You may handle that in another way, and sometimes we do, and not everybody.
He's comparing speeding to going into NCIC and finding dates and warrants and getting revenge. That is apples to oranges right there, my friends. It's apples to oranges. You can't compare speeding, which is, yes, you're breaking the law, but going to NCIS for personal use and personal gain is fraud, and it's abuse, and it's illegal. People can get hurt. That is way worse. You are a police officer. You have a responsibility. He's comparing what a police officer who took an oath, who was doing against his oath, comparing to a regular citizen speeding. Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Ourselves as a community a resolution to this case.
Nicole Pepper, a fight between the FBI and local investigators in one of Austin's most infamous unsolved cases, and whether the feds have information that could finally unlock the nearly 30-year-old yogurt shop murder mystery.
Here's KVUE senior reporter Tony Ploheski with federal journalist Brian Bell.
This year will be 29 years.
Oops.
It's just like it just happened.
We heard a knock on the door at 5:15 in the morning, and it's the cops telling us there was a fire at the yogurt shop. They wanted to know if we were the parents of Amy Ayers.
Our life changed forever that one night.
You don't ever think anybody's going to come into a yogurt place and shoot you. I mean, and shoot you and all your friends. It just doesn't happen in a yogurt place.
We owe ourselves as a community a resolution to this case.
It's frustrating that we're so close.
Everybody says that you'll be better with time. It don't get no better.
It was a crime that both horrified and broke the heart of Central Texas. 4 teenage girls shot in the head in an I Can't Believe It yogurt shop, December 6, 1991. The building torched, and the fire destroying most of the evidence. 8 painful years passed before the police finally arrested 4 men and charged them with capital murder. Then the cases crumbled. 2 of the suspects, Forrest Welburn and Maurice Pierce, never went to trial. The charges against them dropped. 2 others, Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott, were convicted.
We finally got answers. Somebody's going to pay for the crime. I mean, the girls are still gone. It's never going to bring them back. But those guys ain't walking around on the street.
But the courts later overturned those convictions.
It's wonderful, and I'd like to thank God and my families and my attorney for this opportunity. Thank you.
Back to day one. I mean, it's like the murders happen all over again.
I feel like every time we think we've made a little bit of headway, we take steps backwards.
Prosecutors took Scott and Springsteen to trial with no forensic evidence. Investigators had worked for years to get any kind of DNA profile from the crime scene, but the samples revealed nothing. Then in 2008, as technology advanced, police learned that scientists had begun new testing that could at least reveal a male-only DNA strand. Unlike traditional DNA that can prove a person's identity, this type of profile, called YSTR, shows an entire family line of men. Cousins, brothers, uncles, and fathers may all share the same strand. When detectives sent a sample from victim Amy Ayers' body for testing, the profile they got back matched none of the 4 suspects, a fact that led prosecutors not to retry Scott or Springsteen.
I could not, in good conscience, allow this case to go to trial before the identity of this male donor is determined and the full truth is known.
There comes a point when, what else do you do? I mean, we've exhausted all the means that are available to us at this point.
About a decade later, in early 2017, an Austin police cold case investigator learned about a growing number of male-only DNA databases. There was one in Florida that especially interested him. He uploaded the profile into that database, and when he got a match, investigators thought the yogurt shop case was about to take off.
They had a hit, but now we need to know who the hit is.
It was very exciting to have something to pursue.
All right, I just wanted to put that out there with 4 females, 4 people, and they used DNA male only to find the father. Okay? Okay.
Agrees with that either. Well, I've been pulled over and I've been given breaks
We knew
too.
there was still
but I'm not talking about just that. Let's just say it.
Resolution, but to have
Goodness gracious. And I just wanted to point this out before I go on to the next slide. Records should be electronically converted. Evidence storage should be available for long-term storage of forensic evidence in murder cases. Submit cases to the FBI's VICAP database, which contains case information indefinitely. So let's see if that happens. Which I feel like that has not happened. There should be contingency plan in place to handle the resource issues in a major investigation. Buildings, office space, computers, phones, vehicles, food, and other necessities should be considered in the plan. Utilizing non-law enforcement agencies such as the fire department for use of their high-tech equipment may also be included in the plan. It was recommended that agencies develop emergency response plans and establish MOUs at the local, state, and national level. Training. Training continues to be an issue for all law enforcement departments. Complex homicide investigations, especially those involving serial murder cases, depending upon the experience and abilities of investigators to effectively conduct the investigation, which is what Ann Taylor is looking into. With the retirement of many experienced homicide investigators, new investigators need training and exposure to a wide range of investigative techniques. Attendees also suggested the utilization of standardized training for homicide investigators, crime analysts, and medical examiners. So I have an awful inkling that is not happening. That the resources within the department, all that money is not used for training throughout. A lot of these, I'm not about these specific trainings, but I've been through lots of trainings. I've got my master's in criminal justice. I've taken some other type of courses for like credentialing, and it's a day or two at the most. It's an all-day event, and then it's fresh in your brain, and then there you go. Is that anecdotal? No, it's training. That's training. That's training to learn about the case that you're currently doing. What kind of training are they doing throughout? I know they did some training with the phone pings, but what about training about the bodies and about timelines and about putting the information into the databases correctly and organizational skills? At this point, and I hate to go there, and it may not be respectful, but it's kind of tough to not be at this point because there's 4 dead people. I feel that crows would.
All right, can I stay in here? Absolutely, better. You can sit and watch. Right, we'll see what happens. Come on then, send in your mastermind because it's going to need that.
Alex studies wild birds, which he releases after 3 months of research. This one is nicknamed 007, and it's about to attempt what Alex believes is one of the most complex tests of the animal mind ever constructed. The bird is familiar with the individual objects, but this is the first time he's seen them arranged like this. 8 separate stages that must be completed in a specific order if the puzzle is to be solved. And if the bird succeeds, it'll be a world first. He takes time to have a look and then starts with the short stick. Stage 1. He finds it's too short to reach the food. He then sets off to get the first stone. But he drops it. And another. He seems to be stuck. But then, something seems to click. He deploys the first stone. then another. Got it. The 8th and final stage. Success. 8 individual stages of one complex puzzle completed. That was remarkable.
That is remarkable that a crow can do an 8-step problem. A crow. Do you think he'll be able to put information in a database? I think so.
Never ever.
Forensic issues in serial murder cases. Forensic issues in serial murder cases. Recently, there has been increased attention on the forensic sciences by law enforcement, prosecutors, and the general public. In the past 2 decades, there have been tremendous technological advances in the laboratory testing of forensics. So you got the CODIS and the symposium as beneficial to serial murder investigations by providing links between previously unrelated cases. CODIS is a national automated DNA information processing and telecommunication system that was developed to link biological evidence, DNA, in criminal cases between various jurisdictions around the United States. Samples in CODIS include DNA profiles obtained from persons convicted of designated crimes, DNA profiles obtained from crime scenes, DNA profiles from unidentified human remains, and DNA from voluntary samples taken from families of missing persons.
Ribonucleic acid contains every detail that makes you human. As personal as the whorls and lines of a fingerprint, but far more difficult to hide, DNA is the next wave in scientific sleuthing. Today, scientists can extract DNA on a sweat-stained hat left by a nervous killer. From saliva on the stamp of an extortionist's letter.
No DNA at the crime scene.
Or from dried blood or skin scraped from underneath a victim's fingernails. Microscopic evidence has always been left behind by criminals. Only with the advent of DNA profiling has it become incriminating. DNA, or deoxyribonucleic acid, contains every detail that makes you human. Back to where it was. No 2 people, except identical twins, share the same patterns. DNA is small enough to fit inside the nucleus of every cell. Its shape is a double helix, like a spiral staircase wrapped around a column. Uncoiled, the double helix would stretch to 8 feet. About 99.5% of everyone's DNA is the same, but some sections vary greatly from person to person. By studying those sections, scientists can identify victims and unmask murderers.
All right, so this is why I named this Audit the FBI, because the FBI is there, according to this symposium, with the methodologies to help facilitate the law enforcement to complete their investigation in a organized manner so they get the complete information and be able to use their systems accordingly and appropriately so they can help solve this case. And so far, the FBI, from what we've been told, have not been that helpful. They've been helpful with the technology type aspect, but not the nitty-gritty part, like the meat and potatoes. Like making sure that information got put in the databases correctly so that when the defense asked for it, they didn't just get like just a bunch of information thrown in that wasn't organized. You're not following your own protocols. You're not following your own protocols. You're not following your own methods. You totally just threw that to the wind. And you did this to a law enforcement agency, the MPD and the ISP, who do not do this regularly, obviously. And I mean, maybe they were open and honest and trying to get the help and ask for the tips, and they follow the protocol, especially when Fry did the Yellow Brick Road with the FBI training. So there was some type of understanding with both. There was some collaboration going on, but it looks like both have dropped the ball. And the FBI did this whole symposium back in 2005 to make sure that this doesn't happen. And it sounds like they didn't really do much to help MPD or ISP. So I have to give some empathy to MPD, especially when the FBI are the ones that are there with the technology and the protocol with the evidence-based practices to help facilitate a murder case, a multiple homicide, possible serial murder case. Unbelievable. And right here, samples in CODIS include DNA profiles obtained from persons convicted of designated crimes, DNA profiles obtained from crime scenes, DNA profiles from unidentified human remains, and DNA from voluntary samples taken from families of missing persons. So here they are trying to use 23andMe as if it's DNA from missing persons. No, they gave their genetic material, their DNA, to help themselves. They paid for a service to help for themselves. They paid for it. And you took advantage of it, which is against the law. There are constitutional rights that we have to make sure that these things don't happen. You overstepped your bounds, just like with the the CDIC, when the police were using it to try to get girlfriends. Or the NCIC. And then he went ahead. It was like, well, everyone breaks the law. You speed. No.
Ourselves as a...
You wear a uniform. You have a badge. You took an oath.
All right, can I stay in here?
Not acceptable.
Nucleic acid.
So here's the CODIS. What is important for law enforcement to understand is that the information contained at the LDIS and SDIS levels may not automatically be sent to or searched against the NDIS level. So here's the levels here. It's broken down. There are different legislation requirements for inclusion into NDIS than to LDIS or SDIS, and not all LDIS and SDIS profiles are sent to NDIS. Even when NDIS is queried, individual SDIS databanks may not be queried. Therefore, when dealing with a serial murder case, investigators need to contact their LDIS or SDIS level representatives to ensure that in addition to the NDIS databanks, samples are compared in the individual SDIS databanks of each state that is of investigative interest. In cases where there is only a partial DNA profile, a national keyboard search can be requested through the NDIS custodian, CODIS unit, FBI laboratory. AFIS is an electronic databank that compares unidentified latent and patent fingerprints to the known fingerprint file. There have been a variety of local AFIS systems in use since the 1980s. In 1999, the FBI's Integrated Automated Fingerprint Identification System, IAFIS, became operational. IAFIS is designated at the National Repository of Criminal Histories, fingerprints, and photographs of criminal subjects in the United States. It also contains fingerprints and information on military and civilian federal employees. So here's all information about
is actually
CODIS.
different.
It's a lecture.
Okay.
It's
and when you do that
minutes.
by the numbers, 0.1% of our DNA actually ends up being 3 million base pairs. Okay, so out of all the DNA in our bodies, really,
here.
for wanting to identify someone by their DNA.
She kind of sounds like me, but I she's not as well versed in DNAs is someone who is in a medical field, which, I mean, she did it. She did it. You go, girl. So the CODIS databank of these samples is comprised of 3 different indices or levels: the National DNA Index System, the NDIS, the State DNA Index System, SDIS, and the Local DNA Index System, the LDIS. So I kind of skipped that part. My apologies. You may have already figured it out. National, State, Local. National, State, Local.
We're looking at 3 million.
When conducting serial murder investigations, it is important for investigators to promptly seek guidance from appropriate forensic database experts. Such experts can provide information regarding what limitations exist and what additional queries can be made of the systems to obtain additional investigative information. Another area in which forensic science can play an important role is the recovery and examination of trace evidence. Trace evidence is described as small, often microscopic material. It commonly includes hair and fiber evidence, but may encompass almost any substance or material. Trace evidence may provide important lead information pertaining to offender characteristics, vehicle and tire descriptors, and environmental clues that relate to killing scenes and modes of transportation used to move bodies. So the trace is more about fibers, tangible, not so much fingerprints, okay, trace evidence. So I don't know if they're taking trace with DNA, but trace evidence is more about hair and fiber, substance material at a scene. That's why they were trying to find, I hope they were, fibers or any type of hairs in his car, in his apartment, at his office, in his classroom. Trace evidence. Carpet, hair, clothing fiber, because if he stabbed them and it was a brutal murder, there would have to be some type of, they had to wear clothes, so clothing fibers. A skilled trace evidence examiner can compare the trace evidence from all of the victims in a serial murder case in an effort to identify evidence common to all of the victims. This trace evidence will reflect a common environment with which all of the victims were in contact. This common environment will repeat in objects in the serial offender's world, such as his vehicles and or residence. This can demonstrate that all the victims had contact with the offender at the same locations, which has not been verified or concluded. Attendees at the Serial Murder Symposium universally acknowledge that serial murder cases present unique circumstances and concerns. And you know what? If they believe that Brian Kohlberger is a serial killer, then wouldn't his trace evidence be at other places? And if they were, hopefully they put it in these freaking data banks. Because apparently when they went to his house, he had 6 black coats and 6 black pairs of pants and hoodies and IDs and gloves. So in some cases, agencies submit evidence to different laboratories, even though those agencies are located adjacent to one another. These issues degrade the ability of law enforcement to consistently collect evidence. So that's a lot of people are saying about that, how they didn't use a lab that was with them. They went to Pullman instead. out of Washington State. Attendees identified a number of forensic issues facing the law enforcement community in serial murder investigations and made the following suggestions. Once a series is identified, the same crime scene personnel should be utilized at related scenes to promote consistency and evidence identification. Cross-contamination should be proactively prevented. Documentation among law enforcement agencies should be standardized. The number of laboratories and experts involved in serial murder investigations should be limited to properly certified facilities. When consulting with forensic scientists, investigators should prioritize forensic examinations based upon their potential investigative value. Forensic testimony should be limited to what is needed for successful prosecution. Utilization of charts, graphs, and other appropriate audiovisual aids showing forensic linkages will clearly and succinctly convey the facts of the case. Well, the defense did that, and the FBI went to her house and paid her a little visit. When necessary, investigators should seek independent secondary reviews of laboratory results. When necessary, investigators should seek independent secondary reviews of laboratory results. This may be somewhat problematic since there are crime laboratories that will not duplicate forensic examinations. However, exceptions are sometimes made to this policy as a case-by-case basis. And here is a forensic evidence case vignette, which they were able to get because of trace evidence of fibers from car and I want to say a blanket that was used for the bath mat, the Afghan from a former home in Virginia, the trunk of his car, carpet fibers and hair consistent with his car. So that's what trace forensic evidence is used for. Trace evidence. So latent fingerprints belonged to Kristen Lisk were located on the inside of the trunk lid of Evance's car 5 years after the fact. Latent fingerprints, not a partial print on a buckle of a bloody bath on a sheath. Prosecution of serial murder cases. And here we got Bill Thompson. The recognition and investigation of a serial murder series is often perceived as a separate and distinct process from the primary goal in these complex cases. The prosecution and conviction of the offenders responsible for the homicides. It was a consensus of symposium attendees that law enforcement and prosecutors should work cooperatively as the investigative and prosecution process are inextricably linked. So, his job did not sound easy, but sometimes you have to be a leader and say, where's this, where's that, do I have everything at the same time? But the prosecutor can assist with critical decisions early in the investigation that could potentially impact on court admissibility. Prosecutors are also in the best position to evaluate the different murder cases within the serial investigation for presentation in court. Case management and investigative decisions making are still controlled and managed by the law enforcement agencies. The prosecutor acts in an advice. Why is so much control is done by law enforcement agencies when they don't have the proper abilities to handle it? That's why you're having this symposium. That's why you have the FBI. They clearly, there is a lack, and we keep giving them more control than they should probably be given. Expert witnesses often play a significant role in high-profile serial murder investigations dealing with forensics and competency issues. You think? Hello.
Or suspects this morning.
Entering the residence.
And And there's a case vignette, media issues. And here they said that you should identify one spokesperson, the Public Information Officer, PIO, to speak on behalf of the investigation. This person would, in conjunction with other members of the investigation effort, prepare releases, make statements, and update the media on behalf of all involved jurisdictions, including forensic laboratories and medical examiners' offices. To eliminate confusion and controversy, MOUs should include an agreement regarding the designation of a single PIO and well, we don't have to deal with that, or we don't know. The role of the PIO is extremely demanding and time-consuming, and they should not be assigned any additional investigative responsibilities. The PIO must be aware that any verbal comments that make to augment information in the written press release can negate the strategy of the written press release. Any verbal comments made in conjunction with written press releases should be coordinated and rehearsed with the lead investigators prior to those releases. So when I first read this, I thought it was this guy, Fry, and then Lemire, and this other one were just kind of in conjunction, but he was the POI. But then come to find out,
Tell us about the first one.
So
it's this guy, Captain Anthony Dollinger. He's the PIO for the media. And he's the one that's been giving out the press releases, but I have not seen him in person. And this is what we went through before. And press releases should have very specific objectives, have a positive tone, inaccurate information distributed by the media regarding a serial murder investigation should be identified and addressed by law enforcement as soon as possible. Contact should be made as soon as possible with media outlets to have erroneous information corrected and retracted, which did not happen. Ethan's parents came out first. In high-profile serial murder cases, the media may attempt to interact with members of victims' families. Victims' families suffer emotionally from their loss. It may interact with the media in ways that could negatively impact the case. A victim's family's goals and objectives may not correspond with those of law enforcement. This can be exacerbated when the investigation continues for a long period of time without conclusion. Establishing liaisons with each of the victims' families is the simplest way to counteract that, which was brought up earlier and which has not been successful. So here they are doing the rumor control. This was done on November 23rd. Of the skin dog. They're aware of the deceased, which I was not aware of this. Incident a report of deceased animals left on the resident's property. This was determined to be wildlife activity. Okay. The 911 caller has not been released. Online reports of the victims being tied and gagged are not accurate. So, not accurate tells me that it is possible, because right here it's they say he was here, be unrelated. Unrelated, not accurate. Online reports of the victims being tied and gagged are not. They didn't say not true. They didn't say are not in this case. We're not in our findings. The Moscow Police Department is utilizing assistance from, we all know that. They say that every single day. And that serial killers have actively communicating with the police or media, which some people felt like it was that Papa Roach. Here comes the talking heads, which sometimes I feel like it's these former FBI agents that are, most of them are like that, but we'll get into that with Steve and the former FBI at the Ann Burgess and Gary Brucato. So if responsible professionals are requested to provide statements about ongoing cases, the following guidelines are suggested. Speak in general terms only. Do not comment on the particulars of the current case. I don't even know. Do not criticize the investigative efforts. Do not misrepresent one's credentials or experience. Provide information to educate the public on the issues involved in serial murder. So, I guess the former FBI agents are doing this part, not MPD or ISP. They're not giving any information about the serial murder, so I guess it's the former FBI agents are doing so, which Mary Ellen's doing a great job. The other ones, So here, the media's role in the reporting the facts of a case is a major public service. The media's role in reporting the facts of a case is a major public service. However, providing a forum for speculative commentary can be counterproductive and potentially dangerous. Public comments on an active investigation with incomplete or incorrect information are merely speculation and can seriously jeopardize an ongoing case and place citizens at great risk. Accordingly, we respectfully request that restraint be exercised and comments withheld until after an arrest has been made. Okay, well, arrest has been made. So, okay. So here, they did their first press conference on November 16th, and then they get Bryan Kohberger on the 29th of December 29th or December 30th. And then once they got him on January 3rd of 2023 for immediate release, they went ahead and Judge Megan Marshall issued a non-dissemination order in regard to the murder case against Bryan C. Kohberger. The order prohibits any communication by investigators, law enforcement personnel, attorneys, and agents of the prosecuting attorney or defense attorney concerning this case. A copy of the order can be found on our website. Due to this court order of Moscow Police Department will no longer be communicating with the public or the media regarding this case. So from November 13th to January 3rd, they worked hard from November 13th to January 3rd, and now their hands are clean. Their hands are tied. They don't have to talk. They don't have to say anything else. Everyone can move on now. I find that part the most interesting of all of it. So once they have their suspect, then they're done. Is that what that means? Jeez Louise. And that is it. Whew, that was tough. Yowzas. Well, that was tough for me. I'm sure it was tough for you. I'm sure maybe one person listened to the whole thing from beginning to end. I don't blame you one bit. But I needed to get that out there because not many people know what the methodology and the processes are, the FBI's role when it comes to a serial murder case. And it looks like they're not hitting a home run with it at all. They are not helpful in assisting whatsoever. And I'm going to go ahead and end this. Thank you very much for subscribing. Please like, share, hit the notification bell. I will go ahead and continue on to the next, which will be from December to December 8th of that Surviving the Survivor, where we'll hear how the former FBI agent talks about Steve in a way that is very distasteful. Because in my opinion, the way Steve has acted up to that point he's acting like a grieving father. And people like to think and say how they would act in the moment, but when the actual time comes, rarely do you even act the way that you thought you would. Because what you have imagined is not actually what's going to happen at the time of how you handle it. So when people comment on how other people are grieving and how they would do it, you're projecting. It's disrespectful. It's not being empathetic or sympathetic at all. And we definitely need to be aware of what systems are put in place for when these types of events happen, and see where we can grow, and maybe another symposium is needed. Maybe we need some more elevation on the requirements of police officers and at entry level. I did to get my master's, but I had to do other things with it as well, like learn about community-based policing, and learn about restorative justice, and learn about how to teach police officers about de-escalation, and what kind of implementations are being done with that, if any. So it's definitely a community that's involved in here with how this case is being involved, and it's definitely a small, tight-knit community that did not really take care of their community, that it escalated to this matter. I found it interesting with the Jack the Ripper, how there were so many eerily similarities with that. You know, man with a knife coming in, women on the bed, single did it himself, the four were the same, a 12-hour difference before the body was found or being looked at. It's very interesting, to say the least. And so I have a hard time believing that some stranger went over there and did that on the night of November 12th into November 13th, or whichever. And I have a hard time believing it, because it just does not, the way it's been brought to our attention shows that they're hiding something. And I tend to believe that MPD knew they messed up big time, and now they're just trying to hide it. And people who don't do their job in the beginning know how to hide their mistakes pretty well. They know how to lie and hide. I've been around it, I've seen it, I've witnessed it. It's unfortunate that it's happened up to this magnitude, but I have a feeling, and as we have seen, how many students have died there. A lot of students have died, and a lot of animals have been tortured and killed there as well. So there is something festering in there that is not healthy, and it's very scary, especially when you are a parent sending your child there to get an education. It sounds like Great Council has a lot of pull. I'm sure they bring money in, but just because you bring money in does not mean you can act the way you do and have people die from hazing. Until next time, thank you for listening to Roz Knight, and let's squeeze that quo.